Listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. U.S.-China trade tensions showed no sign of abating on Monday as China announced new tariffs to be placed on 5,000 different American products beginning June 1st, unless a trade deal is reached before then.
We say fight back!
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Today we're reading about Thunderdome politics, an uncivil war taking back our democracy in an age of Trumpian disinformation and Thunderdome politics by Greg Sargent, the Washington Post columnist. This is from his chapter on voter suppression. It's page 37. Republicans and Democrats inhabit different political realities, as mentioned in a previous chapter. But there are certain facts about our politics that are just objectively true. One of them is this. Generally speaking, efforts to make it harder to vote are almost always pushed by Republicans. You cannot understand what is happening in American politics right now without recognizing this stark and very fundamental difference between the two major political parties. During this decade, procedural hurdles were put into place in around 20 states that in some manner or other have made it harder to vote or to register to vote, or have undone previous efforts to make voting or registering easier, or have otherwise threatened serious disenfranchisement. Most of them were the creation of Republican lawmakers and officials. The difference in the two parties' national platforms for 2016 tells the story. The GOP platform champions additional hurdles that are absurdly disproportionate to the phantom abuse it alleges, while the Democratic platform champions multiple specific ways to make it easier to vote, not harder. The most common and controversial of methods used by Republicans to suppress Democratic turnout is the requirement that would-be voters present identification at the polls. The game here tends to turn on requiring forms of ID that some groups are less likely to have, making participation harder for them. Other restrictions include techniques like cutting back on early voting and making it harder to register, both of which have, in recent years, been instituted in multiple states. Republicans who have passed laws making it harder to vote have tended to claim such measures are necessary to protect against, quote, voter fraud. We'll look at this in more detail below, but for now, note that most of the states that have passed such measures did so while under Republican control. As New York University political scientist Samuel Isikoff has memorably put it, the single predictor necessary to determine whether a state will impose voter access restrictions is whether Republicans control the ballot access process. Scholars trace the modern era of warfare over election rules to the intensely contested presidential election of 2000, in which a divided Supreme Court halted the recount in Florida, throwing the presidency to George W. Bush. The closeness and partisan acrimony of that contest, combined with the intense national focus on election rules that accompanied the court battle over it, helped persuade both parties to invest much more attention and energy on those rules. As a result, both the implementation of measures restricting the ballot and the legal battles over them have intensified in recent years. A brief glance at the surprising history of voter ID laws begins to tell the story of this tightening. In the 1970s, several states implemented voter ID measures, but all of them provided for ways that voters without the proper ID could cast a ballot. By 2000, there were 14 such laws, and they had been implemented by politicians in both parties. But by the mid-2000s, amid rising post-2000 acrimony, a handful of red states began implementing voter ID laws that the nonpartisan National Conference of State Legislatures described as, quote, strict, meaning that they make it easy to disqualify those who don't pass muster. After one of those laws in Indiana was challenged and then upheld in 2008 by the Supreme Court, an escalation began that gained momentum in the Obama era. From 2010 onward, the adoption of voter ID laws in general, and of strict ones in particular, accelerated. Though a handful were blocked in the courts, as of this writing, a total of 34 states have voter ID laws in effect, 24 that are deemed non-strict and 10 that are deemed strict. The strict ones are in red states or in swing states where they were implemented by Republicans. The story is very similar if you evaluate the state's voting rules in a broader way, by including not just voter ID measures, but also cutbacks to early voting and restrictions on registration. Here the trend is just as pronounced. After the 2010 elections, the Brennan Center for Justice documented a sharp rise in efforts to pass such measures in the state legislatures across the country. Not all these efforts bore fruit, but many did. By the time voting took place in Election Day 2016, some 14 states had these new restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. Now, as of this writing, by the Brennan Center's count, some 20 states have successfully implemented either strict voting ID requirements or cutbacks to early voting or restrictions on registration or other measures with meaningful disenfranchising effects. If you're a liberal who's frustrated by the seemingly unbreakable Republican dominance of national politics, not to mention GOP control of most state governments across the country, then the chances are that these restrictions figure heavily into your explanation of this GOP supremacy. Indeed, social media has been absolutely saturated in recent years, and variations of the lament that Republican political dominance is largely maintained through a combination of nefarious and undemocratic
tactics. This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good morning, everybody. It's Jefferson Smith here, sitting in for Tom, who is not feeling well. Our thoughts go to him. We hope that he is getting rest and not just having pain and discomfort. We will be talking about some pain and discomfort in the country, unfortunately. Overnight, last night, in following up to Alabama's decision previously, Missouri has joined to pass their own version of abortion ban. As we said yesterday, Alabama is not an isolated incident. It is not merely a story of a single state or of a single legislator or of a single bill. It is indeed about the onslaught of anti-freedom and anti-women legislation. It is part of an onslaught of the subversion and erosion of democracy. There are 22 states that right now have Republican trifectas that have full control of the apparatus of government held by the Republican Party in those 22 states. Essentially all of those states, nearly all of those states, will take a crack at undermining or outright eliminating a woman's right to choose. Later in the show, we're going to have the communications director of Planned Parenthood of America talk to us about what's happening around the nation, what happened in Missouri, what is being done in response, what we might anticipate with federal courts as they look at this. And of course, all of this looking in the rearview mirror, looking just recently as what has happened, which is a stolen Supreme Court seat, the recent confirmation also not only of Gorsuch but also of Kavanaugh, a right-wing majority, the most conservative Supreme Court this country has had, I think, since the Lochner era. But now it has taken on a cultural conservative element in addition to the economic conservative element of the Lochner era, the anti-democracy opposed to the will of the people era of the Lochner era, now going also to anti-freedom, particularly for women. Also today, we're going to talk about barriers to democracy, the new moves, including stopping polling place support, the ban in Arizona, special documents required in Texas. There's now a gold coin that you can buy for God and Donald Trump. I want to talk a little about the gold coin. The call-in number here is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, just giving a preview of what we're going to be focused on today. We'll also have a number of guests. I think if there's time, I want to talk about honor. I want to talk about honor in countries and ask the question. I haven't fully fleshed this out yet, but ask the question, does the United States have honor? Does our government have honor? Does our president have honor? Is honor an important thing in a culture? We'll also have another installment of Watch Your Language as we try to think about the rhetorical architecture of a move in favor of democracy. And it's Thursday, so we'll do Thank You Thursday. What's good news? What's good out there? It's not all good out there. We recognize that. We are not Pollyanna, but we also recognize that we don't want to be a part of a revolution if we can't dance to it. We've got to find some joy. We've got to find some light in the darkness. We've got to find some hope amidst the pain. What are you seeing out there that's giving you hope? Who is somebody you want to shout out? What is an effort that is happening in a local community that, if modeled elsewhere, could help transform the conversation, could help move us in a direction of pro-democracy, could help develop a stronger middle class, could help address the erosion of the planet and the heating of our climate? What are things you're seeing that could reform and improve and salvage democracy itself? What's good out there? The telephone number is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. Settle in, but don't settle down. We're going to be with you for the next 3 hours. It's going to be fun. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully a few times it'll be surprising. We'll be taking your phone calls. We'll be also listening to guests. I'll say the call-in number one more time. It's 202-808-9925. 202-808-9925. I'm Jefferson Smith. It's an honor to be with you. I don't think I've asked anything before, but I'm going to ask something now. And I'll probably mention it one more time, but while calls are coming in, this seems like a pretty good opportunity. We started a nonprofit station in my hometown. We started it after Tom and other progressive voices were taken off the air by Clear Channel, when Clear Channel ended right after the Obama election, right after Mitt Romney, who was a shareholder and partner in Bain Capital, who owned principal interest in Clear Channel. Right after that election, Clear Channel ended all the progressive talk formats that they had up and down the West Coast, including the one in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. And that meant that there was no longer that progressive radio station in our town. And a group of us got together in cahoots with activists in the local music community and started a radio station. It's X-Ray FM. And it's been an inspiring little thing we've been doing. It's a small station, but it's been named best radio station in our town, won best of Portland for the last 4 years. And not as a testament to that we get everything right, not as a testament to we're the biggest station, but that people are rooting for us. It's an online vote. I'd ask you to vote. It's an easy thing. I'm not even asking you for money. isn't a pledge drive, but if you had a chance to download the X-Ray app or to go to xray.fm and put in just a little online vote. You can vote, it's one vote per email address, so you can share it with anybody that has an email address, and just cast a little vote for our little underdog station to be named Best of Portland. You can live anywhere and vote. We ask real human beings to vote and not non-human beings. But that would be a little thing I would ask. We're going to take our very first call. Do I have time, Sean, to take a quick call? Let's take our very first call from Elizabeth from West Hollywood, California, where my brother used to live. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi. Yesterday you were talking about the abortion issue.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about it again.
I worked in the child support court. Well, I worked in family law court for many years, and then I worked occasionally in the child support court. And the thing that they don't even mention about this whole abortion issue is who's going to pay for this child. And I thought that if they're going to have a law that a woman can't have an abortion, there should be an addendum to include that the man has to pay child support from the beginning. It's appalling what some of these men who have many children all over the place. I've experienced that issue when I worked in the child support court, where a man would go to back to his wife in another country, and then impregnate her. He has 8 or 10 kids with this wife. He has a girlfriend here. He's got 3 children with her, and had another a couple of liaisons where he's had other children and can't afford to support any of them.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I always thought the resolution is if you don't pay your child support, you should be have a mandatory vasectomy. You know.
Elizabeth, appreciate the call. One of the major points made yesterday by so many callers, and I am, and one caller in particular, I'm going to want to bring up her call again because I cried about it last night. But when I was talking about it to my wife, but the idea that the only important moment, the only important thing that needs to be figured out is what happens prior to birth, and that after that you're on your own, is a toxic idea. We'll be talking about that and more coming up. Again, it's Thank You Thursday. What's good out there? We're also going to be talking about some tough stuff. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in 202-808-9925. Ellen from Portland, Maine, the first Portland, as distinct from my second Portland. You want to talk about Alabama? Speak your piece.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks for calling.
I have two. You're from the other Portland.
There you go.
I have 2 things to say. One, we won't go back. You know, what they're doing in Alabama is beyond insane. I remember, I'm an attorney in 3 states, and I remember my first legal aid gig in college where we were 100 miles an hour like a factory. We were emancipating minors so that they could go to court to get a declaration that they were an adult as a child so that they could exercise their right to choose. And you haven't lived till you've seen coat hanger. It's a tragedy, it's a travesty, and we won't go back.
Do you think, Ellen, there is a chance that that not only in the generation of activists that emerged in the era of Roe versus Wade, that emerged in the essentially in the area in betwixt the civil rights era and or as part of the civil rights era and in the run-up to the Vietnam War protest era, do you think that there is a chance, or how big a chance do you think there is, that not only many of those activists are reinvigorated and called to action and service again, but also that there is a new generation of activists who recognizes that there are fundamental freedoms that we can no longer or not at all take for granted?
Well, we can only hope, but but the only way this will happen is if people take to the streets. And you speak of a time where people were forced to choose, and I remember this when G. Gordon Liddy was the prosecuting DA in Poughkeepsie, New York, and you had to choose between an anti-war demonstration and your legal work. So it will happen, but only if people are willing to take to the streets. And I have a second thing to say, please.
All right. Usually, Tom's rule is usually one per, but you seem so nice. Go ahead, Ellen.
Thank you. I'm Jewish. And the reason I'm saying that is because you speak very kindly and graciously of the evangelical movement yesterday. And I just wanted to respectfully remind you that we are Jewish, we are out there, and we have nothing to do with the New Testament.
And I do respond to. I know that so much of the anti-abortion movement tries to root itself in the Bible, and I do, and I will continue to, and I will continue to try to do better and better at even speaking in that language in response to that. The music is telling us to go away, but I have no illusions that there is only one religion in this country, and really appreciate your call.
Thank you.
We're back. Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff Smith. We're going to go straight to your calls. Want to hear from Ann from Van Nuys, California. Ann, good morning.
Hi. Thank you. Listen, I'd like to bring up two things. I'd like to bring up the fact that we spend hundreds of millions of dollars of tax dollars to support Viagra. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I don't know why that it isn't brought up in these protests, because taxes are paying for that, and that makes it possible for elderly men to impregnate younger women, and then, and so on. But the other thing I wondered, if the ERA were to come up and be passed, would it be any help or assistance in promoting women's health care?
I think it would. And I want to be careful not to overstep my own limits of expertise and therefore be nothing better than a two-bit mansplainer. But let me give you my impression. Is the Equal Rights Amendment, there are a couple of questions that Roe versus Wade answers. One of them is whether or not that it addresses, and it will need to be addressed by any court that reviews Alabama or Missouri or any of the states that are going after really significant restrictions to women's right to choose. And one of those questions is, what is the cognizable liberty interest of a woman in making that choice? And second, what are burdens that are either due or undue? What are burdens that allow the state is allowed to be place upon that cognizable interest? Equal Rights Amendment passage, in my judgment, would strengthen the argument of the cognizable interest for women. And you could say not only that in order for them to live an equal life, they've got to be able to make a full range of choices. So I don't think it would be dispositive, but my own impression is that it would indeed strengthen the argument. What's your impression?
Okay, I go right back to the simple fact that I think, am I not a human being? Am I not a citizen? Am I not a woman? Am I not a person? Do I not pay taxes? Am I not entitled to equality? If I'm not entitled to equality, then tell me so.
You are a human being. And I think, and one of the reasons I appreciate the calls so much is that when the focus is not placed, when the focus on this is not placed on people who are and can become pregnant, when it's not placed on women and trans people, we just miss the misogynist element of the entire debate. And I know that I'm not the expert on that, and I know that I too am trying to be a better ally in a misogynist culture that has benefited me. But I appreciate, and I think our listeners appreciate the reminder.
Thank you very much for letting me speak.
And thank you so much.
Okay.
Diane from Fort White, Florida. You want to offer a small thing that's not yet being reported. You have a chance to report it here. Please do.
I just love the sound of your voice.
Well, that's so nice of you. I like the sound of your voice.
Honey. Okay, down here in Florida, we are dealing with Senate President of, the legislature. These toll roads, no one wants them. And there was a flash mob at Bo Diddley Plaza yesterday in Gainesville, and the local news is not reporting on it. I'm seeing videos of a poor kitten covered in some sort of foam and a dryer fire. I mean...
So Dan, I got a few comments. There's at least a few things that have come to mind. What's the state of local newspapers in your town? Is it basically the same as happening nationwide? We've seen a decline in local journalism?
Well, Daddy calls it the GD Mullet Wrapper. That's the Gainesville Daily Mullet Wrapper. And I think that's owned by some corporate entity. Thank God WCJB is not owned by Sinclair, because nobody wants that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get news around here.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have a local group called Our Santa Fe River Inc., and they're the ones that, along with the Sierra Club, that put together the flash mob. And evidently there were costumes and everything. And I'm a farmer, and I don't get out much, but I'd like to see that on my local news.
There's one. I'll give you one example. And there is this overall decline in local journalism and the sucking in of all news resources into national organizations and also wealthy tech organizations. And to understand this, we can't neglect the importance of Facebook and Google as rising monopolies in their own spheres.
I'm not joining Facebook. I have no interest in that.
So far, you give me good stuff. So the GD Mullet Wrapper. Now mullet in my town is when you have business in the front, party in the back on top of your head. So is it that kind of mullet wrapper, or is it the mullet of an animal?
No, baby. Down here, we actually smoke mullet.
Okay.
And not on your head.
All right. I appreciate that. I'll Google it later. Other people might likewise. Yeah. But here's another dynamic, and this is one of the reasons why the people who support shows like Tom's show and stations like the stations that air and show Tom's show, people who support free speech TV, etc., are so very important, because. Yeah. When you have an entity that is not purpose-driven, that is merely profit-driven, and the only thing that you understand that will impact that profit is eyeballs, then what you're worried about is the art. And I don't mean the artistry. I mean the existence of a picture. I'll give you one example. The example I remember, Diane, was our local Fox affiliate that had a story about a pit bull attack. I think it was in Florida. And there was nothing about that pit bull attack that had any relevance to anybody in Portland, anybody in Oregon, but they had a really engaging, a really shocking picture of the pit bulls like jumping over a fence. And so they showed this story as if it were relevant. The only thing that was relevant about it is people would say, wow, look at that. It's like going through YouTube videos on the TV screen, which is why we need purpose-driven media and why I appreciate you so much listening to the show.
Hey, baby, my vet calls them terrier mixes.
So does anybody try to adopt them? We'll talk to you soon.
Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff, 202-808-9925.
For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglas's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglas was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. I wanted to remind people, in just a minute, by the way, we're going to be talking to Dr. Lena Wen, the president of Planned Parenthood. It'll be an honor to have her. Obviously, it's in the context of Alabama passing the nation's most restrictive, essentially outright ban on abortion, clearly unconstitutional. Just begging to be overturned by a federal court who follows the interpretation of the Constitution, and then begging, almost literally begging, a now fully right-wing majority of the Supreme Court to change the interpretation of the Constitution to allow the most extreme law to be allowed. The state of Missouri followed up with their own version. We'll talk to Dr. Lena Wen about what's happening in Missouri also. I am reminded, last night, I mentioned this a little bit ago, and I don't, if you were listening yesterday, I suspect you were moved as well, because I think so much of what's going on, I mean, I don't think you can understand what's happening without seeing it through a lens of deep cultural misogyny. I don't think you can understand what's going on without seeing it as also a cynical ploy to build political power in support of oligarchs and do it on the backs of exploiting misogyny. I think something else that's going on is people in my generation forgetting and not having real-time memories, having lots of people who probably didn't tell us, but lots of people in our lives who've had abortions, but not had people in our lives who were victimized by having to suffer illegal abortions. I will never in my life, I don't think, forget Trisha's call. Trish called yesterday and told us her story of her grandmother who passed away, who died during an illegal abortion. And the story moved me during the show to just about tears. And when I was talking to my wife about it again, if I'm not careful, it's going to happen again. That her grandmother had 6 kids. It was the middle of the Great Depression. Her grandmother had 2 10-month-old babies, twin 10-month-olds, and they didn't have enough money to feed the kids they had. Her grandmother got pregnant again. And they said, we can't afford to feed the kids we have. We aren't going to be able to afford to feed yet another baby. I have 10-month-old twins. They're going to be breastfeeding for a while. And she made the very challenging choice to terminate the pregnancy, but it was illegal. So she couldn't go to Planned Parenthood. She couldn't go to a local doctor. She couldn't get a proper set of prescriptions and have a proper procedure done. But she had an aunt who could perform the procedure. The details of that procedure were probably, thankfully, not shared with us, but it killed the grandmother. And so now you had 6 kids who were motherless in the middle of a Great Depression, who were already having a hard time having money to eat, who now didn't have anybody to be their mother in the home to feed them. I think our generation can forget. And I really appreciated Tricia's call and really appreciate calls from people who've been directly impacted by this discussion, so it is not only theoretic, so it's not only seen through a political power lens. Anyhow, let's remember. And let's also talk to somebody who is an expert, I think the only physician, the first physician in the last 50 years to run Planned Parenthood, Dr. Lena Wen. Planned Parenthood provides health services to nearly 2.5 million men and women each year. And I believe Dr. Wen is with us now. Dr. Wen, can you hear me? And welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
I can. Thank you very much, Tom.
What are we missing? My name is Jeff, by the way. I'm sitting in for Tom. It's an honor if you call me Tom. You can call me whatever you want. You're Dr.
Well, nice to talk to you also, Jeff.
No, it's great. You're Dr. Lena Wen. What do you think people are missing? What do you think the media has been missing, the conversation is missing as we analyze what's happening in Alabama and what we're seeing what's happening in a bunch of other states also?
What you said just now is exactly right. Because on the one hand, we need to talk about how stigmatizing women's health care and treating reproductive health care as something separate is a tool of oppression and a tool of misogyny. But on the other hand, we cannot forget what it's really about. And what it's really about is women's lives. This bill that got signed into law yesterday in Alabama, this heartbreaking, horrible bill that bans abortion basically entirely with no exceptions for rape and incest, that would criminalize doctors for up to 99 years in prison. The impact of this is that women are not going to get the health care that they need. It's going to directly endanger women's lives. Thousands of women died before Roe every year, and that could happen again. And we as Planned Parenthood simply cannot stand for that. We have to remind everyone about what's really at stake here, and that this is not just about the women of Alabama. This is about all of us, because what these politicians in Alabama are trying to do is to prompt a challenge to Roe versus Wade and to ban access to all safe, legal abortion. And the consequence of that, well, we know what happened before Roe, and we simply cannot go back to that time. Now, we know that we have the American people on our side. Support for Roe versus Wade is as high as it's ever been. 73%, 78% in some polls say that they support Roe versus Wade as the law of the land. We know also that women are outraged. Women are disgusted by what is happening, and we are ready to mobilize, to organize, and to make sure that we hold our elected officials accountable for what they're supposed to do, which is to increase health care, not take it away, which is to make sure that our children have more rights, not fewer rights than we do, and to secure the health and the well-being of all of our residents.
I want to ask what's happening in the states, but I also want people to understand you and learn you, because I think that you are in such an important position at this moment in history and are going to be looked to for leadership and in a position to offer such critically needed leadership. How did you get into this work?
I'm an emergency physician, and it's working in the ER that I saw what happens when people do not get access to the health care that they need. And I also saw working in the ER that just because there is access available doesn't mean that people can literally get to it. If there are bad policies in place, I mean, I worked before and after the Affordable Care Act and saw people literally die because they did not have access to health insurance. I had a patient who came in with a stroke, and while we could treat her stroke, the real problem was that she couldn't afford her medications and was cutting her blood pressure pills in half, was rationing her insulin for her diabetes. And that's actually why she had the stroke. And so I know that in order to improve our health, we have to both provide exceptional health care and fight to protect access to that care. That's the work that Planned Parenthood does every single day. That is our commitment to our patients. We are proud to provide health care, life-saving, life-transforming health care to 1 in 5 women in America, and to men and to all people as well. And we're also proud to defend our rights and defend our freedom, especially at this time when everything is on the line.
I am reminded of election night. I was a little bit surprised by the Alabama law, and not personally fully surprised because I know there are 22 states that have Republican trifectas, and I know that there have been efforts in the growing majority of those states to undermine or outright abandon a woman's right to choose, eliminate a woman's right to choose. I was a little bit surprised because I thought there'd be more nibbling around the edges rather than being as extreme and obvious as Alabama has been. Did it surprise you, or so a little bit surprised? But then I also recognize that I do see this through and try to see this through a humble lens myself, because then another friend was saying, "No, Jeff, this was what," and I saw somebody say a similar thing on Twitter. No, this is what women were crying about what so many women were crying about on election night, when my wife was crying about election night, because she recognized this wasn't only about a power struggle, this was about a life and death struggle for so many human beings and so many women and trans people in the country. Did Alabama surprise you, or did you just see this coming the moment that Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed?
We knew that this was the intention of these anti-women's health politicians all along. For years, they've been passing legislation ostensibly to protect women's health care and children's health, but actually now we're seeing their true colors, what they really stand for. And what they really stand for is to ban all safe legal abortion in an attempt to have power over women's bodies. That's what it's been about all along. And we have to put the focus squarely on where it should be, which is the impact on women's lives. And look, we also have to look at the other health outcomes and what's happening in these states. Alabama has some of the worst health outcomes for women, one of the highest, actually the highest rate for cervical cancer in the country, a critical shortage of OBGYNs, rising maternal mortality. And instead of improving health for women, in fact, exactly the opposite is happening, that these politicians are taking away health care, and that will have impact on generations to come.
Dr. Lena Wen, we'll be right back.
Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're talking to Dr. Lena Wen, the president of Planned Parenthood. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We'll be right back. We're talking to Dr. Lena Wen of Planned Parenthood, who I just heard telling us that knew and anticipated the desire, and now what's happened in Alabama has laid bare that desire in clear and high relief. Missouri last night, Dr. Wen, as I understand, also just passed what some have called an 80 or 90% abortion ban. I think their deadline is 8 weeks, which is well early of the Roe versus Wade standard. What does 8 weeks mean? Some other states have aimed at 6 weeks. I've heard those called 80 or 90% abortion bans, or forced births in 80 to 90% of cases. Help us understand what those kind of bans mean for women and mean for human beings in the country.
We should call these bans for what they are, which is they are total bans on abortion care, on the right to safe legal abortions. This year alone, just in 2019, 16 states have introduced the legislation to ban abortions as early as 6 weeks. Actually, Alabama's goes even further. Alabama says it's any time after conception. So literally, a woman cannot get an abortion because as soon as she finds out that she's pregnant, it would be illegal. And 6 weeks. Most women don't even know that we're pregnant at that point. And if we did, it still takes time to make an appointment and go to that appointment. And for so many women, it's extremely difficult because there are 6 states in the country where there is already only one abortion provider in the entire state. There's a section of our country, a huge section of our country, 1,600 miles that a woman would have to go without having access to a physician, nurse practitioner who's able to provide abortion care. And so it's horrific to see even more barriers being put up. And Missouri, I think, is another example of a state that's facing huge health challenges. I went to medical school in Missouri, and we see the actual public health outcomes in Missouri right now. In many parts of Missouri, the rate of maternal mortality is 50% higher than in the rest of the country, which is already shameful because American women today are 50% more likely to die in childbirth than our own mothers were. Missouri is facing a syphilis outbreak. The rate of congenital syphilis is higher than it's been in nearly 2 decades. And congenital syphilis has huge impacts on the newborn, including brain damage and possibly death. The rate of syphilis overall in Missouri is skyrocketing. 5 counties are facing an 1,000% increase in syphilis cases. What these politicians should be doing is to listen to the will of the people and to see that public health outcomes are poor in their state. They should be doing everything they can to improve health. And I just want to say, these politicians do not get to call themselves pro-life when they are destroying the lives of women, children, and families in their state.
You use the phrase anti-women's health. Another word, one of the reasons I'm honored to be able to sit in and do this show is I learn stuff every time. I learn stuff from callers, I learn stuff from guests, I learn stuff in preparation. A comment my wife made as I was prepping was, we need to understand, Jeff, is a bunch of people in Alabama who don't know what they're talking about, who are making laws, who don't understand science, who don't understand healthcare, who don't understand women, who are making laws that deeply impact women's lives. I hear that music, which means we're about to come back. Can you stick with us for a minute?
Absolutely.
We're talking to Dr. Lena Wen. I'll follow up on that question in just a moment. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in, and joining us, and we're honored to have her, is the president of Planned Parenthood, Dr. Lena Wen. Dr. Lena Wen had a chance during the break to talk to us about the impacts that the Missouri law, that what she dubbed also should really rightly be considered a total abortion ban. Missouri is 8 weeks. Other states have done 6 weeks. Alabama, of course, doesn't even put weeks. As soon as you know about it, you essentially can't have an abortion at all. Clearly unconstitutional under Roe versus Wade, and the impacts that would have on women's lives. Where I started to go was recognizing the lack of expertise that so many of us have, and the opportunity for us, and I will say, speaking personally, appreciate the opportunity to learn more about the topic. It's a horrible context in which to learn about the topic, but I quoted my wife, Dr. Wen, I know you only have a couple more minutes. You're, I'm sure, seeing a huge rallying of support for Planned Parenthood, for your work, a huge awakening of people to recognize they need to do something. What do you want to ask people to do, or what are you heartened by that people are doing?
Well, I'm glad that people are recognizing that this is not just an Alabama issue or a Missouri issue or a Georgia issue, that what affects some of us affects all of us. This is a direct attack by anti-women's health politicians against the health and the rights of women and all people in this country. And I need everyone to speak up. If you feel outraged right now, don't just feel outraged. Channel that into action. Talk to your friends. Talk to your neighbors. Talk about why this is an assault on our rights like never before. Make sure that you take action. Support groups like Planned Parenthood that are providing exceptional health care every day. Help us to spread the word, too, that our health centers are open. Look, women are confused and scared and are calling us. Actually, our health centers in Alabama have received hundreds of calls from women who don't know whether they can still come and get care. And so help and support us. Know that our doors have been open for 100 years. They are open today. They're open tomorrow. We are going to be here to continue to provide exceptional care. Get organized, get mobilized, make sure that we keep on talking about who is here to stand for women and who is not here for women and, in fact, are here to take away our basic rights and taking away our own, the very ability that we have to make decisions about something as fundamental as our body and our rights.
Dr. Lena Wen, thank you so very much. I think you need to wrap. We'd keep you if you wanted to stay. For those of us who have benefited from, who have participated in a misogynist culture, your being a champion on this is deeply appreciated, and you're spending some time with us is deeply appreciated. I'm sorry that people are having to go through this, and I know how gratified they are, and I know we don't want people to feel comfortable, but how to some degree comforted they are by the fact that you're working on this. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Well, folks, call-in numbers 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. Let's go straight to Christine from Los Angeles. We got a few minutes. Christine, thanks for being patient and joining us.
Thank you, Jefferson. I appreciate your taking my call. I feel like I'm experiencing PTSD with this whole thing for a couple of days with this abortion thing in Alabama. This is hideous. Way back, before abortion was legal in California, a friend of mine got a referral from Planned Parenthood to a doctor in a hospital in Mexico City. And she was fortunate enough to be able to get the money together before her fiancé shipped out to Vietnam. As she was coming out of the anesthesia, she realized that a male orderly was fondling her breasts. That's one little story. But here's a personal story. A couple of years later, abortion was legal in California, and it was required that a doctor certify that it was necessary for a woman's mental health. A roommate of mine, I needed the procedure. A roommate of mine referred me to her gynecologist, a kindly-looking, white-haired old man who told me that I was indeed pregnant and how much it would cost. I blanched. I didn't have that kind of money. Then he told me about his boat and that he would do it for free if I went with him for a weekend on his boat. This is an MD here in Los Angeles. So I went home. I called Planned Parenthood. I love Planned Parenthood, and was referred to a doctor who performed the procedure in a local hospital. It was done under a general anesthesia, and I experienced the most amazing and disturbing psychedelic nightmares that I remember to this day. I thought that I was handling it well, but the nightmares caused me to question, myself. Anyway, some years later, I needed a second abortion and had a vacuum suction performed with a local anesthesia at the clinic of the Feminist Women's Health Center. They told me that the nightmares I experienced were common, and they considered them to be bad side effects. Now, the males in charge of everything at the hospital in L.A., where I had the first one done and had the nightmares, they didn't consider that to be a bad side effect, and they never even mentioned it as a possibility. So I questioned myself, But anyway, going over all of this, it makes me tremble to think of what women are going to experience again. It's awful. My stories are small. They have good endings. But this is absolutely going to be horrible. With horrible, hellish, results for women. And I just wanted to add that. I so
appreciate it. Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think that it would be a good idea to have women call in with their their stories.
Yeah, and
Just have a day of stories, personal accounts.
And I appreciate your story, and we will welcome anybody who wants to share this. Don't want to pressure anybody who doesn't want to share their story, but if you want to share your story, we want to open up the lines to you, because I think I appreciate it so much. I know how painful it's got to be. I didn't have to do it. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart, and I do think it's powerful. I do think sharing your story is powerful, because so many of these stories people don't share, and so we don't see the cost of these. What we just dub as policy choices, we don't see as human choices. And we love you. And we appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you very much.
All right, Christine. We'll be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Thanks to all of our affiliates. Support them. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week, and I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter. It comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Robin Marty. It's titled Handbook for a Post-Roe, as in Roe v. Wade, for a Post-Roe America. And the cut line on the front says, the future without Roe is coming straight at us. This is the roadmap you need for the tough times ahead. This is from Chapter 7, page 101, titled Knowing Your Comfort Zone, Why Civil Disobedience. Access to abortion and birth control isn't just a health care issue and an economic issue, it's also a civil rights issue. And like every civil rights battle, gains are made through acts of civil disobedience or working outside the legal framework. Married people officially gained the right to access birth control only after Estelle Griswold, the executive director of the Planned Parenthood League of Connecticut, opened a clinic and began offering contraception in direct opposition to the 1960s state law forbidding it. That right was extended to single people in 1972 after Bill Baird was arrested in 1967 for purposely flaunting the Massachusetts law and publicly providing contraceptives to an unmarried woman during a college lecture. The Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion spent much of the 1960s and early 70s prior to the Roe decision, assisting pregnant people in finding safe abortions either from legal or illegal providers throughout the country and across the borders. And there were groups like Jane's Collective that provided the service themselves, even at the risk of their own arrest. Today, people are highlighting a number of issues through acts of civil disobedience. North Carolina had weekly mass arrests at their state capitol during Moral Mondays protests, while the Black Lives Matter movement physically closed highways with their bodies. And of course, when Brett Kavanaugh was appointed to the Supreme Court, hundreds of activists were arrested, some multiple times, for interrupting his hearings, protesting in the Hart Building when it became clear the Senate Judiciary was not going to investigate claims of past sexual assault. Some protesters even blocked the stairs prior to Kavanaugh's swearing-in ceremony. As our society recedes further into racism, sexism, xenophobia, and classism, opposing the power structure through nonviolent means grows more imperative. Aaron Mattson, the co-founder of the reproductive rights group Repro Action and Teen Vogue, wrote, "If Roe is overturned or gutted, it is certain that some states will propose and enact some abortion bans, new abortion bans. Again, nonviolent civil disobedience should remain on the table, this time targeting state and municipal level lawmakers. We must remember that while in several contexts abortion rights supporters lack immediate political power, in spite of the fact that nearly 7 in 10 Americans do not want to see Roe overturned, we always retain the power of using our bodies to stop or slow the machinery of state repression." End of quote. Mattson adds, ultimately, it's up to activists to decide. Are we willing to break convention if lobbying fails? Are we willing to strategically expose ourselves to the risks of arrest? And if we are not, are we willing to look into the eyes of the future generations who will be incarcerated for abortions, miscarriages, and pregnancy complications? End of quote. Repro Action is a growing network of state-based activists that conducts political events, teach-ins, and other direct actions to increased access to abortion and birth control services. They currently have national campaigns as well as individual campaigns in D.C., Virginia, Missouri, Arkansas, and Wisconsin. You can join up with or financially support Repro Action to increase their national and local reach. Subchapter title, Is Civil Disobedience Right for Me? What are you willing to do to make sure that you, the people you know, or even total strangers have access to contraception and abortion care, especially once more abortion options become illegal? Are you willing to be arrested if you participate in direct action or nonviolent protest? Is helping someone obtain abortion pills worth a potential prison sentence? Would you drive a teen to another state to get an abortion if that drive makes you an abortion facilitator and thus a federal criminal? You may believe you're willing to risk everything to help someone get an abortion, and that may well be what is needed in some cases in a post-Roe America. But make sure that you've really thought out all the consequences of such a radical approach. These are the questions you should be asking yourself now before new laws are put into place. One small silver lining of the Trump era is the way it has energized so many people to actively resist the political agenda. There are more activists, donors, candidates, and protesters than there have been in decades. And that means lots of people who can work together and step in when and where people are needed. But in certain geographic areas, it is and will continue to be harder to find those with the ability and privilege to do resistance work. For example, with the Trump administration's increasing militarization of ICE and border security, checkpoints into and out of America will be more scrutinized than ever before. With a population that in many cases is literally trapped in places like the Rio Grande Valley or Las Cruces, where undocumented people can neither leave the country for services nor go further into the U.S. for care, the need for additional action and people who have the willingness and ability to act may be greater than in New York City or the Bay Area. Maybe you have a very specific skill set. You might be medically trained, have a legal background, or maybe you've done counseling or social work, or you're a member of the clergy. These are people who will add a lot of value to the movement, especially if it turns out civil disobedience is the right way to proceed. Ask yourself if you're the only person who can do the thing you're considering doing, or if there's a number of people like you who are planning to step up. Then ask yourself what sort of risk you may be running and how those factors balance out. It's almost impossible to be a solitary activist these days, but there are spaces where you can manage. Letter writing campaigns, social media campaigns, information distribution, and fundraising can all be accomplished in a fairly solitary environment. Handbook for a post-Roe America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We're up to page 41 here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good morning, everybody. And if it's afternoon where you are, good afternoon. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in for Thom Hartmann. It was an honor to talk to Dr. Lena Wen. Welcome to our listeners on Sirius XM. We appreciate you. Would love it if you also participated and had the chance to participate in the first hour. It was a great first hour, a challenging one, but we appreciated the challenge. We got calls lighting up. I will give the call-in number, 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. Christine, who just offered her own personal story, who I think was partially inspired. Certainly I was moved by Trisha's story yesterday. Christine urged women with stories to call and share their stories. We do want to make space for that. I think that one of the things that's being forgotten, what's being missed, is the power dynamic. And what we need to one of the things we need to understand is the power dynamic. Some of the comments we've got in, some of the tweets that have come in are remind us of this. People suggesting, well, if the fetus is a child, they should get to vote, or at least the woman who is pregnant should get 2 votes. If men are the ones making all the decisions in Alabama and other states about whether a woman should have a right to choose, then maybe only women should have a right to decide whether men's contraception is covered, or whether men's health is covered, or whether Viagra is covered by insurance. The power dynamic is a critical element of this. The misogyny that elected the current president is a critical element of this. But the thing that Trish and Christine and others have also helped remind us is, and that Dr. Wen helped remind us, this is actually about people's lives. It's not only a theoretic argument, and it is not only about a fetus. It is about women and women's lives, and the lives that they have a right to shape and a right to control, and bodies they have a right to control, and the threat to their lives if freedom is removed from them, if they do not have the power, if they do not have the freedom to make their own choices, the impact that has on them. And that so many of those stories don't spread because women don't share them for obvious reasons, for fear of threat, for people who have been violent when protesting abortion clinics, that women stay silent. And now so many more women and trans people and people who've been pregnant, people who've had abortions, are now saying, hey, listen, hear my story. It was not an easy choice. This is why I made the choice. This is the impact it had on me when laws were either as they are or as they were prior to Roe versus Wade, and that we do want to open a space for those stories. So if you want to share yours, the number is 202-808-9925. Not pressuring you to do so, not wanting to capitalize on your pain, only wanting to offer a space if you want to share that, if you think it might inspire someone else. Just wanted to pass along Christine's urging if it is something that is useful to you, or you think it might be useful to others. The number is 202-808-9925. Appreciate the tweets. You can tweet at Thom Hartmann. You can also tweet at me at Jefferson D. Smith. The We Party Populist tweeted and tagged us by trying to restrict even contraception. This truth is obvious for today's GOP. Punishing perceived promiscuity is more important than preventing unplanned pregnancies. Rita Boone tweeted, I think it's okay you tweeted, it's public, I can say your name. I recommend to all Americans to watch BBC's Call the Midwife on PBS. Last night's episode was about a woman who had a backstreet abortion and the life-threatening repercussions. Matham Activist said, I am talking about the people for whom that isn't true. They exist. Most voted for Trump. They're too busy to work 2 jobs to scrape by. It was another person who did say, since men are controlling women's reproductive health care, I think the speaker should constitute a select committee on erectile dysfunction and put only women on it. Who's with me? We appreciate your comments. We're going to take Stephanie's call from Hopkins Park, Illinois. Stephanie wins the Most Patient Listener Award from WCPT. Ain't Afraid of Me. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Hi, how you doing today?
Hold on.
My question is, if we're going to call these unborn fetuses full sanctioned humans, then I should be able to get child support today at 8 weeks.
Right.
I should also be able to put them on, get life insurance. What if I have a miscarriage? I should be able to collect on it. If they should get Social Security numbers. I mean, all the things that a sanctioned human being can get, unborn children are not allowed to get because they're not considered sanctioned human beings yet. And also working in the mental health field, when a woman is forced to have a child, the stress that's on her, The Planned Parenthood clinics are the one places a lot of them can go to get some mental health help and get parenting help and can get, services for them to help with the stress of having to be forced to raise a child. And I've also worked at a school where we had a 12-year-old girl who kept, getting her mother's two boyfriends, had sex with her. She got pregnant twice. Now, and she's no way near able to take care of a child, and her mother couldn't afford to take care of another child. So while we're taking care of the unborn, we just don't give a hoot about the ones that are born.
Yeah, no, it's one of the most important points, Stephanie. We really appreciate you, and thanks for listening on WCPT. I want to take Randy's call from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go ahead, Randy. Speak your piece.
Yeah, I'm hearing these women talk. Have you ever had friends that have been pregnant and boasted and bragged and been very proud about hearing your heartbeat of the fetus?
I think the case you told the screener
and all this type of thing,
and he did let the call through is you are anti-Roe versus Wade, anti-choice, and you think that life begins at conception and that therefore abortion should be prohibited. That's your basic case, yeah?
Yes. So you can hang up on me?
No, I guess the question I have is, and it's related to Stephanie's. I mean, I knew where you were coming from when the call came through. I guess the question I do want to make most of the space available to women who are impacted by this topic directly, and so do want to encourage them to call 202-808-9925. But maybe
they shouldn't have sex or have
Randy, would you say the same thing to a guy?
For them to have sex and kill people.
Randy, would
That's
you say
not a right?
Randy, would you say the same thing to a guy?
Yeah, I would.
You would say that a guy is. Would you impose an obligation? I let you talk. Would you impose an obligation, Stephanie?
Where are the rights?
Did you? Would you go along with? Would you agree with Stephanie that the man should have to pay for child support at 8 weeks? Randy, you there? Randy, you there? Would
Why?
Let me ask you a few questions then. I think you're back.
Why should I pay child support?
Well,
I had to raise children of my own. I adopted children with fetal alcohol problems.
No, I'm saying, should a man who gets a woman pregnant be required to pay child support at 8 weeks?
Yep.
To ask a couple other questions, do you, if life begins at conception, and if your primary view is that life is so important that it must be supported and protected, I assume, therefore, that you're opposed to the death penalty, that you are in favor of universal health care, that you are in favor of increased funding for foster care, and that means funding that through progressive taxation and making sure there's enough money in the federal government. So you're pro-life for reals all the way through?
No, that's where you're crazy because you assume.
Oh. So it's require the woman to have a kid, but then after that happens, they're on their own?
No, they should be on their own. Yeah, if they're going to have sex.
I hear your view. We disagree, and I don't think it's morally consistent.
Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program, 202-808-9925. I think we're talking about morality, but I think morality has got to protect women. We're talking to Tina from Longmont, Colorado. How you doing, Tina?
Fine. How are you?
Holding up.
I'm sorry. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead. You're the caller.
So perhaps we should look at this from another angle. What about the fact that men impregnate women, and perhaps men at a certain age, maybe 14 or 15, should just have vasectomies, and then there won't be any pregnancies unless the man has it reversed, and then he can plan accordingly.
So right now, the default rule, I forget the law professor, but at Yale Law School wrote an influential law review article that just helping understand a certain set of rules. And they said, well, there's default rules, and you can have, for instance, a set of default rules in law, but you can contract out of those rules. And right now, the default rule for human beings is that that men are in fact able to impregnate women. But you're saying change that default rule so that men aren't able to impregnate women unless they make an affirmative choice to undo the vasectomy.
Yeah, I know it's not practical, but why don't we look at it through that lens a little bit?
No, I appreciate the perspective and appreciate the call. And I also want to say, anybody you want to give a shout out to, because I recognize this Thank You Thursday, we do also want to shine light on good news. Anybody you love out there you want to say hi to, or anybody doing good work in the community that you think deserves a little recognition?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. All my neighbors, everyone I know is doing great stuff.
Well, shout out to all of Tina's neighbors. You're all doing great stuff, and we appreciate all of you. We're going to go to Pat from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thanks for listening on 1350.
Hi, Jeff. I'm struggling with my phone. I had it on speakerphone. I hope it's okay.
I can hear you okay.
Okay. I just want to say that I was really pleased to hear that grandmother story. It's heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a story that I hope I can, hope that, well, I know that I'll share with other people, and I hope a lot of people will share it with a lot of people, because having been raised Irish Catholic and only rejecting it at 47, I'm now 59, I still really do not like abortion, but I don't have to, right? I'm a guy. This story is about a woman I dated here. I live in Albuquerque, where half the population is Hispanic. And I dated a woman that was Hispanic, and a ways into the relationship, she shared with me some real pain, some real sorrow. I mean, deep, deep, deep pain and sorrow. And that was that she didn't have kids. She had 4 sisters, and her family, no brothers, all 5 girls. And one of her sisters had no kids, and her other 3 sisters had at least 5 kids. And what she shared with me was that when she was a teenager, she got pregnant, and she self-aborted. And for fear of her life, of her own father, she literally, not figuratively, she literally feared that if he knew she had had sex by evidence of a pregnancy, that he would have killed her. And in her adult life, she...
Finish your thought quick. You have about 10 seconds.
Okay, and her sister had the same exact story. One of the other sisters that had no kids also self-aborted for the same reason.
We appreciate you, Pat. Thanks for calling. And I do want to say this is a chance for those of us who are looking for opportunities to be allies. This is a chance to be an ally. This is a chance to help bend the arc of history towards justice. You're listening to Tom's Show. I'm Jeff, and we're going to be back. And we're back. There's a bunch of stuff to talk about, but it is hard to depart from the critical civil rights question that is being raised by Missouri last night, by Alabama just previous to that. And I don't think that the Limbaugh crew, that the Fox News crew, that the Hannity crew, that the Pat Robertson crew appreciates, understands not only the depth of the importance here, but what they are unleashing. I don't think that there is a recognition of how much pent-up need there is, how much of a demand there is, how much emotion there is, how much intelligence there is, how much analysis there is, how much energy, how many human beings there are who are impacted by this, who recognize how critical this is in women's and human beings' lives, how many women's lives have been at risk, and both literally life and death, and in terms of just being able to make their own choices with their lives, how many making sure that we have wanted babies in this world who are with families who are in a position to take care of them, how we make sure that forced births aren't the thing that becomes the standard in the country. I don't think there's a recognition. Like, the phones are lighting up, and I raised about 5 topics when we started the show, and there's some things we're going to get to. And let me tell you, even just this, I recognize it's not a representative sample of the country, but we have never had, since I have sat in, more women call, more people share their stories. We have never had more people who want to stick to this topic to make sure we talk about this topic. I don't think we recognize the Leviathan that is there, the power that is there. And it is necessary. People coming forward to help Planned Parenthood, to help NARAL Pro-Choice America, to help organizations, but recognize it's not only going to be up to a couple of organizations. It's got to be up to the entire electorate. It's got to be up to people who can impact the media. It's got to be up to people with platforms. I got a really nice text from somebody who said, Jeff, I heard you say that. I'll even say it. I had to write after hearing you on Tom's program, tell you how important your voice is when it comes to women's rights. When I heard you say your voice wasn't as important as others, maybe meeting other women, I had to write otherwise. Not true. The more enlightened men have the courage to speak up. For other men to hear you is just as important to change a very old paradigm. Keep up your good work. She says some other nice things. And I want to say, I do think there's an opportunity. I will continue to admit my own lack of expertise. I will continue to admit and try to embrace humility and curiosity when it comes to stuff that does not impact me as powerfully, that I do not come to a set of expertise as honestly as so many others. Do want to open space for people whose stories want to be heard. But I do want to agree with that kind texter who was a private note, so I'm not going to share her name in case she didn't want me to. But I do want to say that I do think there's an opportunity for those of us who've caused harm, those of us who have just benefited from misogynist culture. I do think there's an opportunity here to be an ally, to not only smile and nod, but to make sure that people have the opportunity to speak up. If they're not in the mood to speak up, if you've made space, but they want you to speak up also, to in fact speak up yourself, to share stories that you hear, to make sure that people don't just smile and nod at misogyny when they're near it, to make sure that this is a chance that we don't go backwards we had a caller earlier that said we can't go backwards, that we not go backwards in trying to move in a direction of a more equal world, that we can't go backwards. And I do think that this is an opportunity that men looking to, we are a culture that needs to redeem itself. I've said this about the country. This is a nation that needs to redeem itself for sins. It's done some marvelous things. It's done some horrible things. And the only justification for us to have national pride is based on our effort to do more better things and to correct our horrible things. That's true of people, particularly white males as well. We have to redeem our culture. And how better to redeem our culture than supporting women who are championing civil rights? And I recognize that there are challenging moral questions here. And I don't attempt, in the same way that I am not a healthcare expert or an expert on women's health, I recognize also that I'm not the leading theologian. But I also recognize what the ambit of government power should be. This is not only a question of what is or what isn't a sin. This is a question of what should be a crime and what freedom should mean and who should have those freedoms. And if we are going to set a set of restrictions that impacts the freedoms of human beings and the freedoms of only slightly more than half the population, how fair are we being? And are we in fact the land of the free? And are we, in fact, redeeming the culture that needs redemption? This is a chance for alliance. This is a chance for fellowship. This is a chance to support equality and freedom simultaneously. I'll jump off my soapbox to give a chance to have someone else jump upon it. We'll go to Carmen from Philadelphia. Hello, Carmen.
Hi, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm fired up, Carmen.
Yeah, I can hear that. And I don't blame you, because especially that fella a couple of phone calls back. That's what made me pick up the phone, because I was just going to listen until after I heard this guy, and I said, I got to call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it right? I think it was the right thing to at least hear from, to understand. But I didn't particularly learn anything. I've heard all of those arguments. I frankly have learned more from physicians and women's stories and physicians on science that I heard from. I mean, I've heard his stuff from Rush Limbaugh time and time again. Was it right. The right thing for me to take the call? And either way, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I think it was the right thing. And I was calling to give you my abortion story.
Please. Thank you.
Okay. I was 26 years old, and I was at that time was in love with a man who was almost 10 years older than me, who had 3 teenage children from a previous marriage. And regardless of what men say, sometimes birth control does fail, because that's what happened to me, and I ended up getting pregnant by this fellow.
And Carmen, I apologize. The producer just noted we're about to go to break, so please give the short version of the story. If we need to hold you through the break, we will, but go as fast as you can.
Okay. Well, I went down to Planned Parenthood to have the procedure done, and there was a big crowd of people, all white people from suburban areas, trying to tell me not to go have this procedure done. So I told them, are you going to help me take care of this child, raise it, clothe it, feed it? No. Instead, if I have to end up going on welfare, you will accuse me of being a lazy black bee who had the audacity to have a child to be raised on your tax dollars. So I don't care what you say. Go back to your ivory towers in the suburbs or wherever you
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're going to be back with Carmen in just a second to make sure she has a chance to finish her story. 202-808-9925. Carmen coming up next.
We're reading today from William Scherer's classic History of the Third Reich, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. This is from Chapter 7, page 188, The Nazification of Germany, 1933 to 34. The theory which Hitler had evolved in his vagabond days in Vienna and never forgotten, that the way to power for a revolutionary movement was to ally itself with some of the powerful institutions in the state, had now worked out in practice pretty much as he had calculated. The president, backed by the army and the conservatives, had made him chancellor. His political power, though great, was, however, not complete. It was shared with these 3 sources of authority which had put him into office and which were outside and to some extent distrustful of the National Socialist movement. Hitler's immediate task, therefore, was to quickly eliminate them from the driver's seat, make his party the exclusive master of the state, and then with the power of an authoritarian government and its police, carry out the Nazi revolution. He had been in office scarcely 24 hours when he made his first decisive move, springing a trap on his gullible conservative captors and setting in motion a chain of events which he either originated or controlled, and which at the end of just 6 months would bring the complete Nazification of Germany and his own elevation to dictator of the Reich, unified and defederalized for the first time in German history. 5 hours after being sworn in at 5 p.m. on January 3rd, 1933, Hitler held his first cabinet meeting. The minutes of the session, which turned up at Nuremberg among the hundreds of tons of captured secret documents, reveal how quickly and adroitly Hitler, aided by the crafty Goering, began to take his conservative colleagues for a ride. Hindenburg had named Hitler to head not a presidential cabinet, but one based on a majority of the Reichstag, the parliament. However, the Nazis and the Nationalists, the only 2 parties represented in the government, had only 247 seats out of 538 in parliament and thus lacked a majority. To attain it, they needed the backing of the Center Party with its 70 seats. In the very first hours of the new government, Hitler had dispatched Goering to talk with the centrist leaders, and now he reported to the cabinet that the center was demanding certain concessions. Goering had therefore proposed that the Reichstag be dissolved and new elections held, and Hitler agreed. Hugenberg, a man of wooden mind for all his success in business, objected to taking the center into the government, but on the other hand opposed new elections, well knowing that the Nazis, with the resources of the state behind them, might win an absolute majority at the polls and thus be in a position to dispense with his own services and those of his conservative friends. So he proposed simply suppressing the Communist Party. With its 100 seats eliminated, the Nazis and the Nationalists would have a majority. But Hitler would not go so far at that moment, and it was finally agreed that the Chancellor himself would confer with the Center Party leaders on the following morning, and if the talks were fruitless, the cabinet would then ask for new elections. Hitler easily made the talks fruitless. At his request, the center leader, Monsignor Kaas, submitted as a basis for discussion a list of questions which added up to a demand that Hitler promised to govern constitutionally. But Hitler, tricking both Kaas and his cabinet members, reported to the latter that the center had made impossible demands and that there was no chance of agreement. He therefore proposed that the president be asked to dissolve the Reichstag and call new elections. Hugenberg and Papen were trapped. After a solemn assurance that from the Nazi leader that the cabinet would remain unchanged, however, the elections turned out, they agreed to go along with him. New elections were set for March 5th. For the first time in the last relatively free election Germany was to have, the Nazi Party would now employ all the vast resources of the government to win votes. Goebbels was jubilant. Now it will be easy, he wrote in his diary on February 3rd, to carry on the fight, for we can call on all the resources of the state. Radio and press are at our disposal. We shall stage a masterpiece of propaganda, and this time, naturally, there is no lack of money. The big businessmen, pleased with the new government that was going to put the organized workers in their place and leave management to run its business as it wished, were asked to cough up. This they agreed to do at a meeting on February 20th at Goering's Reichstag President's Palace, at which Dr. Schott acted as host, and Goering and Hitler laid down the line to a couple of dozen of Germany's leading magnates, including Krupp, von Bohlen, who had become an enthusiastic Nazi overnight, Bosch and Schnitzler of IG Farben, and Vogler, head of the United Steelworks. The record of this secret meeting has been preserved. Hitler began a long speech with a sop to the industrialists. Private enterprise, he said, cannot be maintained in an age of democracy. It is conceivable only if the people have a sound idea of authority and personality. All the worldly goods we possess we owe to the struggle of the chosen. We must not forget that all the benefits of culture must be introduced more or less with an iron fist. He promised the businessmen that he would eliminate the Marxist and restore the Wehrmacht, the German army, which was of special interest to such industries as Krupp, United Steel, and IG Farben, which stood to gain the most from the rearmament. Now we stand before the last election, Hitler concluded, and he promised his listeners that regardless of the outcome, there will be no retreat. If he did not win, he would stay in power, quote, by other means with other weapons, end quote. Goering, talking more to the immediate point, stressed the necessity of financial sacrifices, which surely would be much easier for industry to bear if it realized that the election of March the 5th will surely be the last one for the next 10 years, probably even for the next 100 years. All this was made clear to the assembled industrialists, and they responded with enthusiasm to the promise of the end of the infernal elections, the end of democracy, the end of disarmament. The book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, by William Shearer.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back, everybody. You are priceless. We appreciate you. And on the air, sticking with us, is Carmen from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Carmen had started her story about her own choice, and that one of her concerns when she was being berated by men at an abortion clinic was whether she would get support from them or from people like them if she needed help in raising that child. I don't want to mischaracterize her story, but that's a little bit of a synopsis. Carmen, you're back. Repeat any part you need to. And I just felt horrible about going to break and saying, hey, please be vulnerable and share your personal story. But, oh, wait, it's time for a commercial. So please do. But thank you so much for starting your story. Feel free to finish.
It's okay, Jeff. I understand. When I heard the music come on, I said, well, I guess I better hold the rest of this until after break.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I was saying is that, and guess what? It wasn't just white men that were staying out there. They had their wives with them, too.
Yeah.
And
you said white people, excuse me, yep.
Oh, yeah, they're staying there telling, trying, oh, no, don't do this, don't have an abortion, don't kill your baby, holding up posters of aborted fetuses in my face and trying to guilt trip me. And I just told them very calmly, I said, you see that man right there? I pointed to my boyfriend, and I said, this man has made it clear to me that he does not want any more children. If I go ahead and have this baby, are you going to help me clothe it, feed it, help me find a bigger apartment for me and this child to live in, help me pay doctor bills if the child is hurt or sick? And they just stood there looking at me. And I said, I know the answer. 2 words. I had to watch my language. I know that. I just said H, no. I said, what you people will do is accuse me of being another lazy black B who had to end up going on welfare to feed her child. You'll say you'll call my child derogatory names and say that I had the nerve to get on welfare on your tax dollars to support another little black B. So, what you need to do is go back to your ivory towers in the suburbs or wherever you come from and pay attention to your own privileged brats, because while you're down here in the city trying to mind the business of other grown people, your kids are going buck wild.
Yeah, it is. I so appreciate you, Carmen, willing to share a story that it is, we use the word choice, but so often when I hear the story, it doesn't sound like much choice at all. When I heard Trisha's story about her grandmother, whether or not she was going to be able to, who couldn't afford the 6 children she had during the Great Depression, and it wasn't a choice. It wasn't a meaningful choice to have another child without the capacity to feed that child. And the government then was already struggling, wasn't offering sufficient benefits. After the Great Depression, we built a little bit more social justice infrastructure to be able to support families, to be able to support children. Over the last 40 years, there has been an intentional erosion of all that support, from public housing to support for health care. We haven't had another move, until Obama hadn't had another move to really support people who were dealing with that. Thankfully, we'd held on to things like WIC, held on to things like the Earned Income Tax Credit. But for so many people, it doesn't feel like a choice at all, Carmen.
You're right. I heard that story earlier. I almost cried.
I did cry
twice. A young lady talking about her grandmother, and oh my God, it just blew me away. I almost cried. And I heard you say you cried a couple of times. I don't blame you.
I cried a little bit when I heard it, and then I talked to my wife. I'm just a big softie when it comes to it, Carmen. And I'm finally letting myself. In my 20s, I wouldn't have cried. In my 20s, I probably would have just cracked some rude joke. I'm trying to allow myself to, embrace emotions a little bit more.
You're a little older and a little wiser now, and I'm thankful that you learned.
I hope so. Well, Carmen, we thank you for calling. We appreciate you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Take care.
All right. Let's hear from Nick from is it Camarillo, California?
Hi.
Hey, Nick, go ahead.
So I have a little statement to say. So it's time for men to step up and stop hiding behind the pregnant women. Women don't get pregnant on their own.
Yeah.
And it's responsible for women to get pregnant. I don't understand all this talking like women that. Women are fine before men get involved in their life. And the men makes them pregnant. So
I'm writing that down, Nick.
Yeah. Well, you talk to the guys in Washington, D.C., and they, the men actually, the guys, who hide behind pregnant woman, and now we have DNA, so you can't hide anymore. My proposal is, first Randy was so wrong, how he can talk like this, saying no, it's all your fault, and I assuming he's a Christian guy. I'm trying to be Christian too, and never in the Bible God said leave them on their own to do whatever and carry their own sins. He came to save. Anyway, so my proposal is $100,000 for the man owe to the woman who get pregnant from him to raise children. I have 3 children. I have 19 years old twin boys and 8 years old girl. So I know raising kids, it's expensive.
Yeah, it sure is. And Nick, we appreciate your call. And I wrote that down. Why do women get blamed? Women are fine until men get in their life. And I also want to amplify something you said. And I understand there's only one religious tradition, but under the Christian religious tradition that purports to be the fuel behind the anti-choice movement, the anti-women's health movement, the anti-abortion movement, under that tradition, the critical elements of that tradition, prior to, frankly, significant funding going in to try to turn the evangelical movement, turn the Protestant movement from being the primary advocates for things like women's suffrage, primary advocates for things like support for child welfare and human welfare, being primary support for some of the most important progressive moves made in the first half of the 20th century. They realized that there was a need to try to change the political landscape in the country, and there started being significant funding for right-wing preachers. But if you read the Bible, if you read the tradition, it's only one religious tradition, but if you really read the primary text of the movement that is purporting to represent that religious tradition, what you'll find is curing the sick in there a bunch of times, helping the poor in there a bunch of times, being a steward of the land in there a bunch of times, love thy neighbor, maybe the critical rule. You have to piece together stuff to find textual support for the Alabama law. I told the story yesterday. I told it really briefly. I didn't really finish it. I didn't tell it aptly enough. When I was in this ice cream shop, and they had this turnstile selling books, and they're all Christian books. And I read the Bible as a kid, and my dad and I read the entire New Testament together when I was 9 years old. I went to Sunday school as a kid. And I don't mean to impose my own views on everybody. I will share my views on many topics, but I recognize that religion is a tricky one. But I am at least familiar. And one of the books on that turnstile was this book, Armed and Dangerous. I picked it up because it was orange. And it purported to be sort of a Cliff Notes for the Bible, an index for the Bible. It was bright orange, and it was called Armed and Dangerous, armed with the word of the Lord, dangerous to the forces of Satan. And you'd look up a topic, like child care. You'd look up a topic, and it would then give you some scriptures. And I looked up the abortion chapter. And the principal thing it relied upon was thou shalt not kill. I went to the W's. I looked up the war chapter. I think I mistakenly said yesterday there wasn't a war chapter. There was a war chapter. What I meant to say was under the war chapter, guess what wasn't there? Thou shalt not kill. That in order to create the fundament of the movement that is really based in misogyny, that is really based on controlling women for purposes of advancing a patriarchal control, and funded and fueled by folks who want to maintain a centralized power structure that includes melting the planet, includes gaping wealth disparities. In order for that twisted logic to make sense, you got to twist Scripture. And that's what's been happening, is the twisting of Scripture. So I appreciate it when you call, and I appreciate it when people challenge that tradition, not just say, oh, well, if you have a religious view, if you're a Christian, you feel this way. You can have a variety of views from a variety of religious traditions. But one view, if you're a Christian, that is not negotiable is you gotta support human beings, and you gotta support kids, and you gotta support people after they are born, and you've got to protect people, and you've got to love people, and you got to love thy neighbor. I'm going to bring this up just quickly because we're about to go to break, because I said I was gonna. This article, this Muckraker article, what will be, Talking Points memo, what will be the biggest obstacles to the ballot box in 2020? Talking about the Arizona law, the law in Tennessee that imposes major fines on voter registration drives, the law in Arizona that prohibits you from taking people to the polls. The next move of voter restrictions, of voter suppression, is to try to stop the voter registrars, try to stop the people who are helping other people exercise their small d democratic franchise. We'll talk more about that as well. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We'll be back. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're listening to your stories. We're also talking about what's happening in the nation. I'm Jeff. This is Thom's Show, 202-808-9925. Dot from Upland, California, you're on the air. Thanks for sharing your story.
Hi. I am calling on the opposite side of abortion.
Sure.
I was a child that born because abortion was not legal, one of 6 children. I grew up with zero self-worth, not knowing that physical abuse was not love. So countless marriages, trying to find love that ended up in abuse. I counted the days growing up until I was 18. I saved every penny I could get my hands on just to escape. I wouldn't wish my life on anyone. I saw the disparity in Christmas gifts. We were always told to make lists. Every child got what they were. Every brother and sister got what they wanted on their list, except for me. My clothes were bought at the secondhand store. All the others received new clothes.
And you lived the life of an unwanted child.
Exactly. It is not something that any child should be forced to live
I'm
through.
so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well,
We just want to.
Don't feel sorry. I'm not calling for sympathy.
No, I recognize it, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
I just want people to know that this is not what children should be growing up with. It's just not. And I don't regret not being with my mother when she died, even though she would died in the same city I lived in. I would not go to the hospital under my counselor's advice.
And how does that, and so for you, what you want to make sure is that we have a set of rules that encourages more wanted children? Is that where you end up landing?
I think that women should be able to decide whether they want children or not, and they shouldn't be tortured just because they're unwanted.
Yeah.
That's what this system is going to set up. Look at how many children are born and put up for adoption and end up homeless because they turn 18 and these foster care parents only cared about their money. They didn't care about their education.
Yeah. And that
it's just a sad set. This is just going to create more homeless people.
Yeah. Well, Dot, I appreciate you. I appreciate you so much sharing your story.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry.
No, why sorry? No, you don't have to even hang up. Why sorry? You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. What are you talking about? The world should apologize for you having to live a life and not feeling like you were loved and wanted and belonging. Like everybody owes you an apology. Like the one thing we should be working for a society where people feel like they belong. That should be like the main gig. Like you are here, and because you're here, we're going to try to love you, and we're going to try to make sure your life doesn't suck. And when you pass somebody on the street, you're going to hope that they're loved too. And if somebody's lacking love in their own life, we're going to try to have a world where people are a little more loved rather than a little less. And that's the best chance we got. You got nothing to apologize for. What are you talking about?
Thank you so much.
We love you.
Have a good day.
Take care. This is Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. I'll pull it together. And we're back. You're listening to Thom Hartmann Show. It's been a serious day. If you got any good news, during the break, we had a chance to hear from Dot, who described herself as understanding what it's like to live the life as she did, as she described as an unwanted child, and that she said she wouldn't wish that on anyone. And she apologized, and I said she has nothing to apologize for, although the world probably owes her an apology. And let's love one another out there, right? Let's love one another. We'll disagree. And our love doesn't have to mean that we support oppression or that we reduce our energy to try to fight oppression. But let's try to make sure people feel that they have a place where they belong, that community is a thing that is for purpose of nurture and making one another stronger and better, and that we can be stronger together than we are apart. And let's just try to spread a little more love. And whatever religious tradition you come from, that can be a unifying principle. That can be something that makes us all a little bit better off. Let's hear from the news break. It is time for Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Bob Ney is joining us. Hello, sir. Thanks for being here. What do we need to know?
Well, thank you, Jefferson. I mean, there's a lot of topics today, and, obviously another candidate in the race. But I think the biggest, most important issue affecting the world, but it's in the United States, is are the developments about Iran. And, of course, I did want to mention I lived in Iran in 1978, and also I worked with the Clinton administration and Bush administration on issues affecting Iran and America. So I just wanted to mention that. So I think when I analyze this, I come from a history of knowing John Bolton and actually having meetings with John Bolton. And about a year ago on Thom Hartmann's show, I had said that Bolton will do every attempt to take us into a war, and of course he's doing that as we speak. Now we're starting to see some fraying within the White House because Trump, although they denied it, he's becoming irritated with his top advisors over Iran, and that one top advisor in particular is Bolton, but he's expressed to other staffers and advisors that he's becoming unhappy with Bolton. He's frustrated that Bolton has allowed the Iran situation to reach a point where it seemed like armed conflict is a real possibility. And Jefferson, what's fascinating about that, if we look at the playbook of North Korea, where Trump threatened North Korea, he threatened to annihilate them, he threatened to do this and that, and all of a sudden they met. So what does Trump say yesterday? The president says, well, he's willing to talk to Iran. Well, good luck on that, because Iran's not going to be willing to talk to him after the canceling of the nuclear deal, after sending, obviously, aggression through military into the Gulf, and after the sabotage, quote, attempt that was made supposedly by somebody connected to Iran on Saudi Arabian tankers. Of course, these are the same people that hacked a reporter to death who was an American resident and denied that they did it. So the credibility factor there is obviously, non-existent with the Saudis. So I think what the president thought, because of the advice of John Bolton, this is what we talked about with former colleagues of mine on the Hill, is that the president thought this would be a redo of the North Korea situation, and it's not by any stretch of the imagination. So, Bolton seems to have lured him into this, Jefferson, yet Bolton is trying to get what he wants, which is one little match, one little spark, and we will be in a full-fledged war.
Bolton and others, and some of the other neoconservatives have wanted to invade Iraq for a while, and I'm reminded of John McCain on video singing Bomb Iran, Bomb Iran. And that wasn't in the last 6 months. John McCain is no longer with us. There are several things I find interesting about this and troubling. One is the cancellation of the Iran deal, that I can really only think of two strategic justifications. Justification is too strong a word. One is that those who wanted to cancel the deal thought they could negotiate a better deal. I don't see how, I don't see under what circumstances, and I see no progress to it. I don't think that was actually, therefore, very real. The other strategic justification again, too strong a word, was, well, get rid of that deal because it might in fact be that some of the hawks liked the idea of war with Iran, did not want a deal because they wanted a war, that Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't mind having U.S. intervention, U.S. military force applied in Iran. But what's interesting, it doesn't seem to me that Trump had much of an exit strategy, particularly because his buddy Putin, I don't think, wants the United States to invade Iran. So it seems to me that Donald Trump is just stuck, and he's going to end up, as you said, doing the same thing of blustering, but then saying, uh-oh, I can't do anything. I need to try to pretend some success happened, but I don't see what could be success. What do you see as a next move for the Trump administration, or at least what do you see as options?
Well, the only option here is for Trump to stop Bolton because, again, Bolton talked him into letting him do this, saying, Mr. President, hey, they're going to back down. Bolton knew very well they were not going to back down. This deal was offered. In fact, I was the conduit to offer the deal to the Bush administration. I sent it directly to Karl Rove. Rove denied that I sent the deal to him. He lied. But it was proven later that Condoleezza Rice knew about the deal. They had an internal fight in the White House, and the Cheney people won. So that was number one. When
So you're
Obama
saying so
became
that there
president, they
was
cut the deal.
that you were involved and there was a chance to make an Iran deal during the Bush administration, but,
yes,
but
during
the
the Bush
neocons won.
administration.
Yeah.
And yes, and they won. Then Obama came along, President Obama, and they did a deal.
What was the sticking point, and what was the sticking point of the deal? Why did, to the extent that information was passed to you, why did they turn it down? Either what did they think they could get better out of the deal, or do you really think it was just so they could they were itching for a fight?
No, and the deal came, and of course, you know who headed to my office, John Bolton. And then Bolton and the whole crew, the Cheney crew, at that time, you know, Bolton was close to the Mojahedin Khalq, the MEK, which was a terrorist group. That whole group effectively went into gear in the White House to stop this. Colin Powell, of course, was on the other side of the issue. And so that stopped dead. And then along came President Obama. He did a deal. And now along comes President Trump. Who's the same guy? Who's the same one? John Bolton. He's the same guy in the Bush administration that sabotaged this deal. He's the same guy that got him into Iraq, and he's the same guy that has now got Trump on the edge with the president not knowing what to do now. Why would the president even say, I want to talk to the Iranians? Because he thought that would happen. This is on the brink, and it's all Bolton. He needs to get rid of Bolton.
Bob Ney, thanks so much for joining us. I'm glad we had a chance to cover that story.
Thank you.
We'll be back. You listen to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in. Honored to do so. Appreciate your calls. They've been lighting up. People have been sharing their own stories about what a law like Alabama's law might have on them. We're also talking about the impacts on democracy and restrictions on democracy. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club, our book today is How Wealth Rules the World, Saving Our Communities and Freedoms from the Dictatorship of Property by Ben G. Price. With a blurb on the back from some guy named Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction, One Right to Rule Them All, The Dark Side of Property. Let's get it out in the open. The United States of America, nations that emulate its governing principles, are governed by a dictatorship of property. Is that plutocracy? Sure, but it goes deeper than that. The U.S. Constitution, as it was written and later interpreted by the Supreme Court, hijacked democratic rights that American revolutionaries thought they had won. The Federalists developed a whole system of law that serves the interests of wealth. Elements of that system include the following: state constitutions untethered from their revolutionary moorings, international trade agreements that supersede local, state, and federal laws, regulations administered by an unrepresentative bureaucracy, political parties that gerrymander legislative districts so that they can choose their voters rather than allowing voters to choose their representatives, corporate property that the Supreme Court has declared to be persons with Bill of Rights protections, federal and state statutes that privatize public governance and prohibit democratic limits on the uses of private fortunes, and local governments declared to be property of the state and made unavailable to communities for municipal lawmaking. We live deep within an undemocratic matrix of law that masquerades as a democratic republic while it legalizes an aristocracy of wealth. The U.S. Constitution was written by men who came from a uniformly privileged class. Charles Beard argued this point in his book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. Beard analyzed the economic interests of those who met in secret to overturn the Articles of Confederation and concluded that the Federalists were motivated by economic self-interest to establish a form of government that would protect their wealth against an excess of democracy, as Alexander Hamilton put it. The Federalists who replaced the Articles with the U.S. Constitution were not fully aligned with the liberating agenda of commoners who risked their lives to throw off the hierarchical chains of Great Britain. They were wealthy men educated in British law with opinions that harmonized with aristocratic sentiments. The authors of the U.S. Constitution are often called the Founding Fathers. Popular history lumps the Federalist counter-revolutionaries in with the likes of Thomas Paine, who with his firebrand writings against monarchy, nobility, and special privilege for the few, inspired the people to demand independence. Popular culture counts the Federalists as American revolutionaries no less fervent for liberty than the men whose ideas of leveling the social class system inspired American farmers and day laborers to pick up their muskets and take on the redcoats. This conflation of the Federalist counter-revolutionaries with those whose spirit of '76 is reflected in the Declaration of Independence and absent from the U.S. Constitution is a troubling reminder that popular history too often preserves false memories. What's the evidence that the Federalists intended a Constitution that weaponizes law to protect the accumulation of property and raise wealth and out of reach of public governance? Well, to begin with, their own words were recorded in Philadelphia in 1787 by James Madison and Robert Yates. Damningly, that record was held secret until every delegate to the clandestine conclave had died and the Constitution they wrote had been the law of the land for 2 generations. We have that evidence, and it tells the tale I'll share in Chapter 2. We also have the product of their cleverness to consider. The Federalists established a quasi-monarchical judiciary. Politically appointed judges wielded the power to veto any legislation that departs from the Federalists' original intent to protect wealthy accumulation from democratic oversight. We have the arguments of the anti-Federalists who called out the would-be American aristocrats for betraying the revolution. If not for them, we would not have the first 10 amendments to the Federalist document, the Bill of Rights, which many identify as the soul of the U.S. Constitution. More immediate evidence that the original intent of the U.S. Constitution was to immunize possession of unearned property from public regulation can be found in the antisocial way the document is interpreted by the courts and how it operates on society today. Here's my argument in a nutshell. We are faced with social, political, and environmental problems that resist resolution because law empowers a wealthy minority to govern based on priorities often at odds with the general welfare. The Constitution, and its interpretation by the courts, amounts to an arsenal of weaponized law able to deliver special privileges to a propertied class. Certain legal mechanisms let those seeking to profit at the public expense block policies that compete with their interests. These legal doctrines operate by a 2-step process. First, they remove democratic rights from the public sphere and deposit them in concentrated accumulations of property. The oddity of attaching legal rights to property itself rather than to people roared into public consciousness with the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United ruling that affirmed corporate property's personhood and free speech rights. Although the ruling shocked the conscience of average Americans, it was not the first time the court had vested civil rights within inert property. Nor were corporations the first type of property to be given legal rights. The second step is for property imbued with rights to deliver those rights as an extra layer of legal privilege to the property owner. When civil and human rights are deposited in property, that property is placed beyond the authority of the people to govern how it is used by its owner. This nullifies the majority's ability to decide directly or through elected representatives what public policy will be. As a result, we aren't allowed to resolve issues of immediate concern to every community. Even when we understand what needs to be done, we're often blocked. And then he goes through the whole list. Benji Price wrote, How Wealth Rules the World.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
41 here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good morning, everybody. And it's barely morning. It's only morning still for 1/3 of you. I'd like to think it's morning in America, but it sure feels kind of dark, doesn't it? If anybody, we're going to do a quick speed round. Also want to reach out again. If there's somebody you want to shout out, if there's a good thing happening in your community, if there is work that is inspiring you, if there is an activist who is giving you hope, if there is an effort whose success might spread to other places, reminding that women's suffrage didn't pass because there was some benevolent Congress that wanted it to happen. It happened because activists went state by state by state until finally it built a strong enough national movement to sweep across the country. Where we can often have our biggest impact is in fact in our local communities, is in fact in our states. We recognize sometimes that stuff can be a little bit harder to find out about, particularly with the state of local journalism, particularly with so much attention being spent on the current occupant of the White House. If there is something you want to shine a light on, I'll shine a light on the folks working on star voting, alternative voting systems in Eugene, Oregon. I had a chance to talk to Sarah Wolf, appreciate you. Want to shout out to another thing in my state, X-Ray FM. You can go to x-ray.fm or you can download the X-Ray app. I'd even ask you to do this. It would be a real favor, because this will probably be the last time I'm with you for a while, that we're up for best radio station just in our town. We've won best of port in the last 4 years. It'd be sure nice to win it a 5th year. You could help. Anybody with an email address can vote. We ask human beings to vote at x-ray.fm. But what is something you want to shout out for? I want to shout out for Trish, who shared her story of her grandmother who lost her life in an illegal abortion because she had 6 kids, including 2 10-month-old twins. Couldn't afford a 7th. Her aunt performed the abortion. It ended her life, and those 6 children ended up childless. What government does, whether or not it says it's going to put an abortion doctor in jail for 99 years, as Alabama has suggested, that is not going to mean there aren't abortions. What it's going to mean is that there are more people with painful, personal, dangerous stories, like Trish was willing to share. I want to say thank you to Carmen, who's willing to share her story of not wanting, I'll use her, quote her, not wanting to seem like another black bee, her words, who couldn't take care of a child, getting insulted on her way to apply her choice, and talking to the white people, again, using her words, who were there when she said, well, would you do anything to help in providing the resource so this child can be raised, can make sure that this child is taken care of? And they said, well, no. And she said, well, okay then. Really appreciate the people sharing their stories. Want to say thank you to Dot, who shared her story of feeling like, and her saying she was an unwanted child, and the pain that she went through during Christmas when her brothers and sisters would get what they wanted where she wouldn't, where they would get new clothes and where she would get used clothes, where the signals sent throughout her young life was that she was a child that was unwanted in that family, and that never went away, and it has stuck with her so much that she thought she needed to apologize for sharing her story instead of saying you're welcome. We appreciated you sharing your story. You had no obligation to do it, but we appreciated you doing it. I do want to make sure we talk, and that just about every time I come on, that we do talk about democracy, that for me what is happening is not a set of isolated instances of assaults on particular specific rights. There is an ongoing war on women. It is so obvious. I didn't used to talk like that. I wasn't awoken to it. I wasn't aware sufficiently of it. I was part of the problem, specifically and generally. I benefited from the problem, specifically and generally. It is now so painfully obvious. There is also a war on democracy, an erosion of the idea that we should make decisions together about what's best for all of us, where equality and freedom can come together, where we can have some version of both. We now know that there is an ongoing, a new set of subversions, of attacks on the franchise, on the attacks of the ability to vote, of voter intimidation, of Texas that is imposing fines and penalties on people who don't fill out a special set of paperwork if they are going to assist voters with physical impairments to help them from entering or to enter polling places. Arizona made it a crime, a misdemeanor, punishable with jail time for registration drives if they are paid for their efforts. And we now know that there is not going to be an end to. There's not a little bit. There's not a little bout of nibbling around the edges merely, or well, they'll just do a little bit of trying to make it harder to vote. It will keep going until there is a strong enough pro-democracy movement to say no more. We will not see a blocking of assaults on women's rights until there is a rising of a movement that wins electoral battles for democracy to make sure that we have a majoritarian country. And until we say no more, this is going to be a place where people belong. You belong. We're going to take your calls. Let's take Lisa's call. Lisa from Niles, Ohio. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, Jeff. Good to talk to you.
Likewise.
And I really like everything you just said there. I agree. And I think our country hopefully is at the tipping point finally where I've just recently awoken, and I think millions of other people hopefully will too. It's time to stop. I mean, at first they oppressed the Native Americans and then blacks and women. It was being done under my nose for the longest time, and I finally woke up. But I'm calling about abortion. I was pregnant with my second son. At 4 months, they do an alpha fetal protein test, and they found out he had Klinefelters, which is 2 X chromosomes and a Y. Mm-hmm. He would have been born a boy, and when he hit puberty, he would have developed female characteristics. They grow breasts. They start, they develop into a woman. Mm-hmm. And along with all the other cancers and medical abnormalities he would have had from birth. 80 to 90% of these children, the reason you've never heard of it is because they kill themselves. Yeah. 80 to 90% of these children kill themselves during puberty. So what I chose was, I love God. I'm not going to say I confirmed I was raised Protestant, but my relationship with God is something personal that I believe in. At the time, I felt like, well, if his soul is going to be damned, I'd rather let it be mine. And that's the way I felt at the time, that if there was a life to be taken, I would do it. I wasn't going to let that be on his soul. But since then, I've settled that with God, and this world wasn't meant for him. This world is too cruel, and I don't think he shouldn't. I never wanted him to have to deal with that. And so I took it upon myself, but I've tried to be honest and open about my story when it was right. And I'll tell you what, there were a lot of people that called me a murderer, selfish, that I just didn't want to take care of a disabled baby. I'm a nurse. I would have loved nothing more than to help a child that I loved. That's not it at all. And I've come to find that people have their own agendas and their own guilt about things. I carried guilt around for years because of what other people told me, but I know I did right by my son. And I know my son is perfect, and he was always loved.
Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Does anybody think this stuff is easy? Does anybody think that somebody like Lisa makes a choice without grappling so deeply with her own duties, with her own pain, with her own responsibilities, with her own faith? Nobody. This isn't easy. The question is whether it should be a crime, whether somebody like Lisa or her doctor should be thrown in jail.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're hearing your stories, 202-808-9925. Thank you so much for sharing them. We'll get through it. We're on with Free Speech TV. Richard from Calumet, Michigan. Go ahead.
Well, I was another one of those unwanted or children. My parents, my dad and mom were very young when they had me, and my dad went off to Vietnam, and while he was off in Vietnam, my mom decided to shack up with somebody else and didn't want me and lied to get me committed. And I ended up growing up in the system, and the system has a way of torturing people beyond belief. The stories of experimental drugs, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, being locked in solitary confinement for weeks at a time, they're all true. And there's many, many places in Michigan. Half of them don't exist. One of the very biggest places was Clinton Valley Center, called Farallon, was the youth program. Another one in Ann Arbor was CPH. And there was an adoption agency called Spalding for Children, who would put kids in abusive homes. And these people were at free rein to do whatever they wanted to kids, and hundreds and thousands of kids that I grew up with, and I have no idea even how to contact some of them to pull us together to fight back. And how parents can use their children to fight amongst each other it's just, if a kid isn't wanted and a kid isn't needed, there's no reason to make anybody suffer. And
Richard, is that place, the place you mentioned, did you mention that place is closed now, or one of the ones that's still open?
All the places I've existed, as far as I know, don't exist. I can't even find my childhood records.
And I'll tell you, it is not a coincidence that housing facilities that were designed essentially for unwanted babies have gone away. In the wake of Roe versus Wade, we have had a much higher percentage of wanted babies, which means that facilities like that end up abusing children are less likely to pop up or less likely to fester.
Yeah, and there's like I said, it's amazing. And I don't know if somehow other people call into Thom Hartmann show and hear this. And if they're able to I'd love people to get a hold of me and get together, because there's so many of us out there.
Is there a resource? Is there an organization that tries to work with adults of people who are trying to recover from that experience? Is there any website?
I went to college. I couldn't read when I graduated high school, and I taught myself how to read. And I went 6 years to college to become a counselor to help other kids to make it through the system. And then our state cut all the programs, and there's no health programs. I'm disabled right now. I got my neck broken in an auto accident, and I can't even go to the social services office and get paperwork because our last governor completely wiped out the social services program.
Yeah. Well,
I
Richard,
spent 4 hours on Monday just trying to get what tiny little bit of benefits I get to send to rural development so they don't take my house away from me.
Well, Richard, we appreciate you. Sorry going through that. Appreciate your time. You listen to Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be right back. I'm Jefferson Smith. Howdy, everybody. This is Jeff. Thanks for being with us. You can call us at 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. You can tweet us at Thom Hartmann. You can tweet me at Jefferson D. Smith. We are taking and hearing your stories and moved significantly by multiple of them. I want to hear from Lorinda. Lorinda from Roosevelt, Utah. Hello, Lorinda.
Hi, Jeff. I wanted to respond to the same thing with Dot and Richard that they did. I had the same experience like Dot. I was the sixth child, and my mother tried to give herself an abortion with the child she had before me. And when I came along, I was the ultimate insult. And, the first, they would come in and beat me even in my crib if I cried. And the first words I remember hearing are them screaming at each other as whose fault I was and cursing. And my nine-year-old sister used to sneak in and take me out of my crib and put me in bed with her to try to keep me quiet so that they wouldn't do that. And they caught me in bed with her one morning, and they said, "Oh, you want her? Well, good." So they just moved my crib and everything out and said, "You take care of her," to my 9-year-old sister. And, I mean, they wouldn't even set a plate at the table. When I was older, they wouldn't even set a plate at the table when they served meals. My sister would feed me food off of her plate. I mean, I don't think I would have even survived, I'm sorry, without my sister. But I feel such empathy and love for Dot. Her story is so much like mine. I've struggled with depression and suicidal feelings my whole life, and I've been diagnosed with child onset PTSD. And, that's...
What got you through? What you said your sister, what got you through?
I don't think I would have survived without my sister. I mean, they just, when she was 9 and I was not very old, they just abandoned me on her. And she said that I was like a doll that she carried around and she took care of. And she was my only advocate. The other children, they took my parents' view, and I was sexually abused by some of them. And they took the view of my parents that I was just a nothing, that you could do anything you wanted to. And so I thank God for my sister, I guess, but my whole life I've just felt like I shouldn't be here, I just don't,
I don't even know what to say. They asked me to sit in because I'm supposed to have things to say. I don't know what to say.
I know you don't, but I was wanting to call in for 2 days and give the perspective.
I'm so glad you did.
Yes, but then I heard Dot, she got in ahead of me, and I really wanted to express to Dot, and to Richard, I have such love and empathy for you. You're not alone, There are more of us, unfortunately. And to these men, these non-ovulators is what I call them, that have so much to say, like these men in Alabama and Randy, walk in our shoes. That's what I want to say.
It's so kind of you to say that to Dot and to Richard. And I'm gathering myself a little bit. It is that idea, and I already gave my rant on it, but you matter, right? Like you matter, and where we can find communities where we find it, and I don't, I'm nobody's expert on this stuff, but I know that having a world, like we even know it from life expectancy. We know that we live longer when we feel less stress, and we feel less stress when we feel more love. That in almost every indication of human health and happiness, a sense of belonging is absolutely critical. That community has measurable impacts on almost every metric of human health and happiness that we have, from life expectancy to suicide rate to alcoholism rate to sleep habits, and just about every single thing. And I will say something else. Like I do this. Nobody does this for the money. I mean, somebody on Fox News, I think, does it for the money. This for me is, it covers, when I sit in, essentially covers my transportation here, and it affords me a meal. But I do it because I feel part of this community. And I hope that and if the only thing this show is a transaction where you get a little news, you hear why we're angry at Trump, why some Republican did something dumb. If that's the only thing that happens, and it helps while away a couple hours, and then we go about our business, that's the only thing that happens. We're not, and maybe it sells some ads. That's not the deal. That's not the gig. What we've got to be doing here is building a community that's pro-democracy, building a community that's pro-human beings, building a community that's pro-Lorinda, that is saying, Lorinda, you belong. You are part of this community. You are part, and all of us in this community matter, and we can make democracy a little bit better rather than a lot worse. And I hope that's the function that we can serve, is that we are in this together, and we can be a little bit better if we are in this together.
Yes, I would love to be able to talk to like Dot and Richard if there was some way to do it. I know Richard mentioned he would love to talk to somebody, but I don't know how to do that.
Well, I'll tell you, if you email us, it's going to be up to them and it's going to be up to you. But if you email us and they email us, of course, and we'll of course connect you together. And if you all tweet at me, I'm Jefferson D. Smith. I don't know if any of you or all of you use Twitter, but if Richard or Dot, if you want to connect with Lorinda, you can tweet at me or you can email the show. And don't know if we can make a connection, but maybe. At least we can make this connection on the air. And Lorinda, we appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, this is so much of the discussion is about division. So much of the discussion is about how the 25 white dudes in Alabama imposed their own will upon the women and human beings of Alabama. This can also be an opportunity for some of us to try to come together to build community, to find some strength with one another, to feel wanted. And I hope we can do that at least a tiny bit for a couple hours. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Big finish coming up pretty soon, 202-808-9925. I don't know if we can do a speed round on this. I don't know if we can, but we'll hear from you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. The U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a grieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations. But now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It is an honor to be sitting in with you today. I'm Jefferson Smith. I've appreciated people's personal stories, and I'll say one of the reasons why. I, roughly speaking, understand the policy arguments. We've been debating, debating societies. We're debating abortion when I was a middle school and high school kid. The arguments around contraception, the arguments for and against, the lines about, well, are we going to take care of children after they're born? The arguments with respect to morality, the arguments with respect to religion, the use of the word pro-life and then forgetting about that when we're actually talking about making sure people's lives are taken care of, making sure that unwanted children feel wanted and have what they need, making sure that people that people aren't killed through a death penalty, that it's applied in racist fashion. We understand a lot of these arguments, but I think there's something we've forgotten, and maybe some things we never sufficiently understood, because certainly for much of my lifetime, we have taken Roe versus Wade for granted. We just assumed, I was talking to Sean, who makes this show possible, who was saying, you know, my whole life, Sean is a woman. She has the name Sean, and she is a woman. And she said, my whole life I knew abortion would be there. Thankfully, I never had to use it, but I always knew it would be there. I don't know if the next generation is going to be able to have that same confidence. We have taken it for granted. Part of that has been not sharing people's stories. Sharing stories like Trish's of when an illegal abortion caused the death of her grandmother. Sharing stories like Richard's, like Lorinda's, like Dot's of being and feeling and living the life of unwanted children, how that sticks with you throughout your life. And I'm glad you're alive. I want you to feel wanted. How do we make sure that we build a society that works so that people are able to live decent lives when they are born? There are places where people belong. Appreciated hearing from Dr. Lena Wen. But these personal stories, this is the stuff that I can't get in debating society. This is stuff that is not just, and this is the stuff I fear we forget. In part because they're painful stories to share, which is why we appreciate them so much. Let's hear from Sam in Orange, Texas. Hello, Sam.
Hey, Jefferson. Thank you, dear brother, for holding this tough conversation. My mother, when she was in high school in the 30s, was sounded to me like date raped and became pregnant, and her older sisters and her little brother packed her up and took her to Mexico for what we always thought was a family vacation. But when one of my girlfriends got pregnant, she shared the story that what they had done was went to Mexico for an illegal abortion, which left her sterile. She had to have, got an infection and had to have a hysterectomy. And my sister and I were adopted. And I suppose my birth mother faced a tough decision and either couldn't or wouldn't terminate her pregnancy. And my sister and I were blessed to have a wonderful mother and father. Mom was a Sunday school teacher. Dad was a deacon in a Southern Baptist church. I became a surgical technician, and I have participated in terminations of pregnancy, and I fully support women's right to choose. My message is to the people that want to do away with Planned Parenthood, that want to blockade women's health clinics. What are you doing to prevent pregnancy? You want to stop Planned Parenthood. They've prevented many more unwanted pregnancies than you have out there in the street thumping your Bible, yelling "Thou shalt not kill,"
and help even more,
shame women,
and help nurture even more wanted pregnancies.
You're extreme anti-abortion. I don't like the term abortion. We didn't call it that. It was termination of pregnancy.
Yeah.
But they want to stop all abortions. How about preventing unwanted pregnancies?
Yeah, I hear you.
Planned Parenthood does not perform terminations of pregnancies. They refer people to gynecologists that will terminate your pregnancy.
No, yeah, Planned Parenthood, they had a chance.
Health.
Exactly. And they've had a chance to. We were really glad to be able to have their president on in the first hour of the show to talk about that. And they're a critical provider of women's health services. And you know, what my dad likes to say is, well, Planned Parenthood is about wanted babies. It's about bringing children into the world who will have the support that they need and make sure that's done in a healthy way. Want to bring on Valerie. Is it Chimayo? I'm not sure how to pronounce the town. Chimayo?
It's Chimayo.
Chimayo.
Spanish accent.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was unwanted, and my childhood was the same as Dot's, but a worse hell of being singled out for at least 50 disfiguring beatings into semi-unconsciousness, endlessly, deliberately underfed and enslaved. And in school, I went through an endless gauntlet of abuse for being silent and disfigured. Then during adulthood, was denied entrance into trade school 8 times for no reason. I spent half my life homeless. But I responded differently than Dot. I became fierce, outspoken, and way more compassionate. And you all may think that I deserve to be aborted because my male parent didn't want me, but I know I am just as good because I saved at least 5 people's lives on separate occasions.
Let me stop just for a second. I don't think there's anybody from anybody we have talked to today, certainly nobody sitting in my chair, who is thinking that anybody should have been. I think the question we're wrestling with is whether somebody who makes that choice or whether the doctor who facilitates it should go to jail.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
My question to politicians,
yeah, go ahead.
it's the same as everybody else's. What can you do to make abortion unnecessary?
Yeah.
Not illegal, but unnecessary.
Yeah.
How about the return to welfare as we knew it, where you could use the welfare money for daycare? Because when they're forcing these breastfeeding babies to go into daycare while their mothers have these minimum wage jobs, they're paying more for the daycare than they're paying for the welfare so the mother can breastfeed her baby.
This is something that hasn't been brought up enough today, and that's probably my fault, and that is the intense, immense cost of child care right now. People have brought up foster care, people have brought up child support, but the monthly costs, particularly in towns with any degree of cost of living, it's so significant, it's so expensive, and it is, to me, just immoral, and I appreciate your point, Valerie, it is immoral to impose forced pregnancies and not provide additional service so that kids can be taken care of, and not just taken care of in the kind of facilities that Richard was talking about, but taken care of in facilities of nurture and ability and health.
Exactly. I'd like to see people fight for the return of welfare as we knew it, but to be able to use our welfare money, for daycare if that's what we need to do.
Yeah, well, Valerie, I appreciate your call, and I will tell you that I am one of many people who are glad you're doing what you're doing. Anne, we may have to go bring your call into the break because we're getting pretty close, but if you're willing to give your story briefly, if that's not rude, would love to hear from you. Anne, is it from Poteau, Oklahoma?
No, but it's in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Anyway, I was raped by my, father twice and got pregnant. And I had 2 abortions.
Oh, dear.
And actually, the abuser was nicer to me than his wife. It was a long life thing of, they were just not nice. They got me because of, so she wouldn't go crazy or something.
We're having a tough time with the connection. And I should have said this again at the beginning of the show. I mean, anybody just joining us, trigger warning up and down the street. We're dealing with tough topics today, wanting people to be candid.
I want those people to know in Alabama, if I hadn't had it, I would have killed myself. I was that desperate.
Anne, you shared your story, and I think people are able to hear it, but the little tricky connection that you said that you were raped. I think you said you were raped by a relative,
yes.
and that you had the access to an abortion. But if you'd been in Alabama, if it had been prohibited, that you don't think you would have made the choice to stay alive yourself.
No, because I was at the tail end of abuse and stuff. I got out of school. I worked, and then I got married just to get out of the home.
How'd you make it after that? How'd you make it through? Anything that could be a lesson or a note of inspiration, or even just something that somebody could learn from about how you made it through? Some of it was having the right to be able to make the choice you made. Any last word?
I had 2 children, and actually my husband and I made it okay.
Well, Ann, thank you so much for calling from Oklahoma. We appreciate you being willing to share your story. Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Not much time left. We'll have time for a couple more stories.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Christine invited people to call and share their stories. Christine, you're the reason some of us are crying. We appreciate you. We'll be back soon. Kevin from Laurel, Maryland, you're on the air.
Yes, good afternoon. I just want to say, give me a minute here. Me and my girlfriend, maybe 20-something years ago, we was dating, and she got pregnant. And while she was pregnant, she had major seizures, where we went to the hospital, and the doctor put her on medication. And the medication would cause the baby to be deformed if she was to take the medicine. So we had to make a choice to abort the baby or have it deformed. But we also was concerned about her health as well. You know what I mean? She was having major seizures, major. And she still have them today, but they're minor. So I'm just saying.
And what'd you go through? What'd you go through? Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, what'd you go through to make that decision, or what did your girlfriend go through to make that decision, Kevin?
It was a very hard decision for her. I tell you, oh my God, she's, you know, of course she's Catholic, and this was her first time being pregnant. It was very hard. It was very hard. She was going through the seizures. She was pregnant. She had to get on this medication to save her life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was very hard, and it was just, I tell you, it's not always a mistake. You understand? It's not always a baby but we had two decisions. Her live her life or take the medication and the baby be deformed. What did you choose? So we chose to abort the pregnancy. Yeah. And I still live with it today, you know what I mean, to this day. So I just want to tell people out there, as a man, I support a woman's right. And it's never an easy choice. It's never. And it affects us as well. It affects us as well. You know what I mean?
Appreciate you. And you know, Joan wrote a note in applauding and encouraging men while making sure that men make space for women and for trans people, for people who can who what do the persons say, who are the ovulating rather than you and I, or you and me are the non-ovulating, but also be willing to lift our voices to help give other people a sense of support, and we appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
All right, man. Appreciate it, Kevin. Robin from Kingston, Washington, it's your time.
Hey, Jefferson, thanks for taking the call. I'm calling up, as I do always, to kind of back you up, and until the woman in this situation kind of redevelop a movement, nothing will really happen legislatively. So this is what a person can do regarding movement and action forward. And I'm going to frame this in a question that is sort of interesting, because I'm 70 and I came out of the 60s and the 70 movements, and I have a question to ask you and actually the audience here. Out of the 60s and the 70s movements, we had women's rights, anti-war, environmental, racial rights, economic, labor justice, anti-nuke, and the beginnings of the GBLTQ.
Ask the question, because the break is coming.
Okay, so the question is, which one of those has actually made some viable progress as far as 2019 goes? There's only one, and that the answer is because they kept at it every day. And that's what we need to do in movements, is keeping at it every day.
Robin, thanks for calling. Hey, everybody. Jefferson Smith, it's time for our finish. I think we've got time for another call or two. Appreciate everybody who has called. Christine had made the suggestion early on and said, please, people call in and share their stories. I also want to appreciate people for listening to those and for being willing to share them. That we have this not merely be an academic debate and not merely a political debate and not even only a moral debate, but also understanding the human impact and understanding the stories that should help shape our understanding so that we better understand the impact this has on families' lives, on child's lives, on women's lives. Whew. We're almost done. We're going to get through it. But the thing is this should be a kickstart, not a pause. This should not be an exhale, but an inhale. Robin, during the break, said the movements that have been successful have been the movements that have kept going every day. This has got to be something we fuel ourselves. It's got to be something we find the self-care we need, find the community that we need, that we pick up every day, that yes, that we settle in, but we not settle down, that we yes, tune in, but we don't tune out, that we do try to find the strength necessary to make our democracy a little bit better every day rather than a lot worse, that it's a little easier for forces of anger, disgust, contempt, and fear. It's a little easier, not only because those are 4 of the 7 primary emotions the plurality of psychologists say dominate our emotional set points, but also because negative emotions end up sticking with us about 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio better than positive emotions. That's why it's necessary for us to build a community of nurture. That's why people trying to build, not just destroy, have to work a little bit harder, have to support each other a little bit more. While people who aren't merely fueled by greed have to work a little harder, have to stick together a little bit more because it's a little bit harder. Mark, I'm going to take, actually I'm going to take Ann's call. Ann, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to make a comment because I'm hearing in Alabama, even if they pass that law that women have to have abortion, and they said that if a doctor commits the abortion, he will be accountable. He will get a felony charge. But what about a priest? A priest initiates these abortions. If they read their Bible in Numbers chapter 5, verse 5, it says that a priest give abortion to a woman because Moses made that law, and I don't understand. And what I'm saying, it should be a woman's choice.
Yep.
Whether or not she wants to have abortion or not have abortion, because women go through so much changes with their body. No government, nobody have a right to tell a woman what to do with her body. And to make this statement, I don't believe in abortion, but I have no right to tell another woman what to do with her body. And this is a big thing to a lot of people that wants to set this law, and they call themselves so Christian, they should read their Bible, where not the doctor did it first. It was the priest that done it first. And they should read Numbers chapter 5, verse 5. Read that whole chapter 5, and they'll find out for themselves. Instead of holding a doctor accountable, they should hold the priest as well. I just had to make that statement.
No, I appreciate it, and I heard
it's a woman's choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
We appreciate you. Thank you so much, Ann. And I hear you on both pieces. One, that we've said that it is not. It is a twisting. It is derogation. It is a misuse. It is one characterization to say that Christian teachings require only one viewpoint on this issue. But most importantly, it doesn't mean it's a crime. The question is not whether or not somebody should make a given choice. The question is whether the collective should be able to impose criminal penalties on someone who makes that choice. I think we got time for, actually, all we have time for me to do is say thank you. And I want to say thank you to some particular people. Thank you for the people who are on hold that we didn't have time. The phone's lit up today. We weren't planning on going as deep on this as we did, but we recognize this is your show. Right? This is your show. We do this to build community. We do this to find strength with one another. We do this hopefully to learn something together, some things together. And I learned a bunch. And from some people who are willing to share. From Lena Wen, the president of Planned Parenthood, who gave us a sense of what they were up against, gave us a sense of what they were fighting for, what they were doing. She's somebody with a healthcare background, first physician, president of Planned Parenthood in the last 50 years. We had a chance to, and Christine said, well, why don't we hear each other's stories? And she was inspired by Trish's story yesterday. Trish, whose grandmother was pregnant in the Great Depression with her 7th child, her 5th and 6th child were 10-month-old twins. She couldn't feed the one she had. She had an illegal abortion because a legal abortion was not available to her, and she died, leaving her children motherless. Dot and Richard and Lorinda and Valerie, all who told stories of being unwanted children. Valerie making a case, I don't want any child aborted, but I also want to make sure that people have the choice and that we do what's necessary, because they're not doing that in Alabama. They rank near the bottom of the country in child welfare. They are willing to kill people if they do something wrong. They are not pro-life in any sense. What they are is limiting women's choices. And so much love to Dot and Richard and Lorinda and Valerie, who have lived lives feeling unwanted. And so hopeful that this community can be at least one place where it is clear that you belong, where you are wanted, where you are appreciated. Kevin told the story of his girlfriend who was going through seizures, that medication that was necessary to control those seizures would have deformed the child, deformed the baby, had that baby been brought to term. And so they decided to terminate that pregnancy. That fetus did not turn into a child. This is not easy stuff. And I don't want to make anybody feel that their moral choices have been discredited here. In fact, the only thing I'm sure of is that I'm not sure. And because of that lack of certainty, because none of us should be so deeply sure, we should not be so blithe as to impose criminal penalties. We got to make sure y'all feel that you belong, and you do belong. You are priceless. You are the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things, sometimes for no good reason. And you're priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. We love you. We appreciate you. Tom will be back soon. I was glad to have the chance to be with you today. Take care of each other.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.